Welcome back to Give Up After 3, a critical analysis of BBC Sherlock, examining each episode to understand how things went so wrong that fans invented a secret final episode to justify why the show had been so bad all along. You can find show notes and sources at zeroindent.com/giveupafter3. And if you want episodes early, you can head over to patreon.com/zeroindent to support us. I'm DC McNeil, author and editor-in-chief at Zero Indent, and I'm joined, as always, by YouTuber Darth. What's up, Darth? How you doing?
Hello there.
It's Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's on the brain.
Yep.
It's Obi-Wan time. Listen, we're at the end of season 2 here. Today we're going to be talking about season 2, episode 3, the Reichenbach Fall. Now this one was directed by. Now, how would you have said it? Because this is the 4th or 5th time we've come across a word where I guarantee I sit there on my notes and I'm like, Darth isn't gonna know how to say this. What? Had you even tried to pronounce it?
For any foreign word, I pretty much just try to hone into my Jewish heritage and pronounce it with as much phlegm as possible. And then it roughly sounds like I know what I'm talking about. So
it sounded very convincing. It was wrong, but it sounded convincing. Like it was, you know what I mean? I was like, oh yeah. Well, it's still not right, but man, a lot of confidence. Look, this episode was directed by Toby Haynes. It was written by Stephen Thompson. The original air date was the 15th of January, 2012. It opened to approximately 8.78 million UK viewers. And a big content disclaimer on this one. It contains heavy topics of suicide and self-harm, as well as a heavy discussion toward the end of this episode, specifically about 2 characters taking their own lives. This one is loosely adapted from The Final Problem. Before we get into the summary, Darth, this is the end of season 2, where I feel like we're about to approach into the we've kind of left the tone setting and this show working out what it is. I feel like this is the big jumping off point. From here on forward, it is full Moffat Sherlock. They've worked out what it is. Next season is just like fully the thing this show becomes. This is really our last kind of, I think, bridging component, at least sort of at a structural level. So what did you think of this episode?
I mean, that's an interesting note, because I did feel like I had fewer notes this time that related to, like, why did they have this character do this? It didn't feel right. So what you just said about the writers, like, finally really getting a handle on what everyone was supposed to do and act like, and their character traits and all this stuff makes a whole lot of sense. I subtly realized that, and I didn't actually put it into words, but you said it exactly. Now, whatever I said my favorite episode was before, now I change it to this one. I loved, like, at least the editing, a whole nother level. I don't know what they did to go to a whole nother level, but it really felt like the editing was at a whole nother level. And then just the writing throughout. Something else that I noticed was like they've tried to put jokes throughout the series that don't, like, half the time at least the jokes don't land, but I felt like every single joke in this one was so subtle and fit whoever said it so perfectly, and they all landed perfectly. I loved the writing, aside from, like, very minor things throughout this entire episode. I love the acting, the pain that John has, the just outlandishness of Moriarty, and how well that it fits with his particular brand of villainy. Just so much about this episode that I just loved.
I think...
And now you may ruin it for me.
Well, so it's interesting. I had a similar-ish reaction to this episode. I don't remember exactly what I texted you, but I think I was like, I'm actually enjoying this. I don't know what this means for me as a person. I had a really good time with this episode until... So, okay. What I would say, to my point earlier, in the idea of this being a real bridging point, this feels like the show Sherlock is going to become in a big way. It stops mattering how crimes are solved entirely. The evidence stops becoming important. It really becomes the kind of dramedy that they've always wanted to make wholeheartedly. I think that there is some stuff in this which I don't necessarily think that excuses. But in a big way, I think the method of this show that we've been doing is starting to pay off for me, because as I was going through this episode, at various points, I can feel them making conscious... I feel the text, at least, making conscious decisions in directions of our characters, where it's like, actually, Sherlock is always going to be this way. Watson is always going to be this way. Molly is this. And it feels very much like they're bedding these characters down a bit more firmly than they have before. It does mean there's a bit of reversion that happens here, which we'll get to, where characters become the person they were in episode 1, in a way that I just kind of scratch my head at, but we'll get right into it. I should also mention that a lot of my theory will be at the end of this episode, only because the conclusion to this episode is really the big kind of epicenter of, I guess, at a theoretical level, what this episode did for the meta and for the way that people were reading this text. That ending is really the catalyst for the change in the way people read this, and the way that these viewers were considering this show as an object. So we'll get into some of that. We'll get into some metas, and then we'll actually talk, Darth. We'll have a little bit of a speculate at the end about how a character survived, but I don't want to spoil that. We'll get to it. Well, I guess I'm going to spoil it in the summary, but here we go. So, in a cold open, I just wrote that in the summary. I don't think
there's no way around it.
No. So, in a cold open, yeah, I should say, as with all of these, like, obviously, we're picking through it, it's all spoilers. If you're watching these along, I would recommend watching this episode first before listening to this, just for the explicit reason there's no way to talk about this without spoiling some pretty big twists. So, in a cold open, Watson struggles to tell his therapist that his best friend, Sherlock Holmes, is dead. 3 months earlier, Holmes and Watson are famous. As they solve case after case, their reputation grows. Moriarty, free of prison, breaks into 2 banks and attempts to steal the crown jewels, all using a single computer program, but is, seemingly on purpose, caught. Despite mounting no defense at trial, Moriarty is fully acquitted of his charges. Moriarty visits Holmes and explains he has a computer program that can hack anything, and that the final problem is about to begin. Months later, a US ambassador's children are kidnapped from a boarding school. Holmes and Watson investigate. Meanwhile, world-class assassins are moving in around Baker Street, flagged by Mycroft Holmes. Holmes and Watson find both children still alive, but as they go to interrogate and find out what happened, the girl is seemingly terrified of Holmes. Anderson and Donovan begin to suspect that Holmes is somehow involved in the kidnapping. When Lestrade brings this to his boss, a warrant is issued for Holmes's arrest. Holmes and Watson are in fact arrested, but perform a daring escape. The duo then, pursued by the hitmen who are after the key that Sherlock apparently has, break into Kitty Riley's house, the journalist responsible for exposing Holmes, only to discover that Moriarty was never real, but in fact a character played by Richard Brooke. Brooke claims Holmes paid him to be Moriarty, and Holmes begins to realize there is no way out of this trap. Holmes then heads to St. Bart's Hospital, where he admits he trusts and values Molly. Holmes launches his final gambit, inviting Moriarty to the roof of St. Bart's. There, the 2 great minds square off. Holmes deduces that the computer code was encoded in Moriarty's tapping while at his flat, and Moriarty reveals there never was a computer program. He's just that good. Moriarty has hitmen ready to take out Holmes's 3 closest friends, Watson, Lestrade, and Mrs. Hudson, if Holmes does not jump from the roof of St. Bart's and complete the narrative. Fake detective is revealed to be fraud, kills himself in disgrace. In a last-minute solve, Holmes realizes Moriarty has a failsafe, because of course he does, and manages to convince Moriarty that they are similar, such that Holmes would do anything to call off the snipers. He is in fact not a hero. Moriarty realizes his kinship in Holmes and acknowledges, quote, "As long as I am alive, you can save your friends," end quote. Moriarty takes Holmes's hand and, in a daring act, kills himself with a pistol. Holmes calls Watson from atop St. Bart's as Watson looks on. Holmes explains he was a fraud all the while, asking Watson to stay where he is. Holmes then steps from the roof. After being knocked to the ground by a catalyst, Watson stumbles over to watch, grief-stricken, as Holmes's body is carried away by the hospital staff. We return to Watson's therapy, where he still cannot open up. Sometime later, Watson visits the grave of Sherlock Holmes with Mrs. Hudson. As Watson leaves, we pan to Holmes watching from afar. Credits. Okay. There's a lot going on here. We're going to probably talk about the ending in some extensive detail, so I just want to get stuck straight in. The episode opens with John Watson in his first meeting with his therapist for 18 months. He struggles to explain the reason for the impromptu visit, but eventually chokes out the words, "My best friend Sherlock Holmes is dead." For me, I think this is a really good tonal bridge from the previous episode, which was also pretty dark. What do you think about this opening sequence? Because I know that you've enjoyed the kind of grimmer tone that they're going for in the previous episode.
My first thought was like more of a filmmaking thing, that a opening on a time skip where you introduce something outlandish, and then the rest of the episode is unraveling how that outlandish thing happened. That's a really like interesting method of storytelling, where it's actually kind of like lazy when you think about it, because it's a way of instantly getting the audience on the hook without doing any extra work.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like taking part of Act 3, smashing it into the beginning of the entire thing, and then rolling with it and letting everything play out like normal.
It's not even like a clever payoff. Just the thing he said turns out to basically be true.
On the other hand, I loved the scene. I loved his acting. I loved how it gets you into the overall story, because it sets this somber tone for the most part. There's a more lighthearted stuff in it, and it doesn't get more serious until like the halfway point or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it sets a weird somber tone and then hits you with like jokes towards the beginning, and so you're kind of left bouncing back and forth between how is he going to die and oh haha that's funny. So I keep going back and forth as to whether this type of opening was good or not. Maybe it's lazy and it's good. Maybe it could be both.
Yeah, I think it could be both at once, right? Like it's good for piquing your interest in a sense, to be like, as you say, like it's a lazy shorthand to be like, hey, we've got something's going to happen here. But it's, and as you say, the aesthetic is good, but structurally it's kind of lazy and bad. And so again, we see this clash of the aesthetic with the formal here, and the rest of this episode is just that for the whole thing. It's just like, here's an aesthetic thing that is cool, and then you look at it from a structural and a formal perspective, and you're like, yeah, but that's lazy and bad. And this is going to become the mode of operation for Sherlock as a show. So flagging that now, we'll talk a bit about it probably in season 3, episode 2, I'm anticipating. But yeah, for now, good identification. Is there anything on the therapist's office that you want to touch on before we get into the actual story?
No, I'm just leading into the flat. There's like several other transition scenes, and I just loving these transitions. A+ editing. That was that was my note leading into the scene, the intro scene in the flat there. Yeah,
absolutely. So the episode then flashes back to 3 months earlier, with Sherlock receiving gifts from various people for whom he solved cases, along with a ton of unwanted media attention, like a lot of media attention. Some things I enjoyed that I thought were very funny. They're sort of in Baker Street talking about it. And John is identified as confirmed bachelor John Watson, which is very funny to me.
I have that note, but for a different reason.
Oh, okay. All right. What what reason do you have?
The way that they played it off made me wonder if this was a super, super subtle gay joke, because there's like 3 of them at least in this entire episode. Because right after the confirmed bachelor line, he immediately jumps into saying to Sherlock, we need to be more careful. And he's actually saying we need to be careful in public because you're getting too popular, but that comes right after the sentence of being a confirmed bachelor and them spending all this time together. So the implication could very easily be that it's a gay reference.
Yeah, a lot of people choose to read it that way. This is them subtly saying, hey, we need to be careful because people are going to realize that we're actually a gay couple if we don't hide it more or something. Like you can see that reading. Yeah.
And it's weird to think about, because you frequently talk about how often the writers know what the audience is talking about on the forums and stuff, so they'll write certain things in certain ways. So they know there's all this stuff about this homosexual relationship, and they put in stuff that could be misconstrued either way. So is that on purpose, or are they just not really taking time to think about what they're writing?
So when we get to talking about the ending and the implications of how it changes what the writers are doing with this text, I think we get a pretty clear answer by the way that Moffat kind of treats the idea of these fans in the next season, right? Very specifically, we'll talk in some detail about Anderson and what the maneuver is that Moffat and Gaddis are doing with the introduction of these conspiracy theorists about Holmes. I think it's pretty obvious to me that they're doing this because they think it's funny that people have this theory. Like this, I read this, and this is just my personal reading. I read this as them laughing at people who would even consider the fact that these two could be gay.
That makes sense from what I've kind of like sensed from the creators.
Yeah, we'll get to some really interesting clips of Moffat and Gaddis talking about it next season, where it's pretty explicit. Like they think that, and I mean they put it in the text, right? When we get to next episode, they literally make fun of people who are interested in trying to work out how Sherlock survived. Like they think you're an idiot for taking this detective story like at face value as things having subtext. Something else I just wanted to acknowledge here is Sherlock fails to understand John's concern for his image. It's simple writing, but this is where I kind of started to feel that they have reverted Sherlock to the character he was initially. In some senses, where he sort of has this affectation of he's like pretending to not get that John cares about him. And I don't, like, is he just messing with John? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I also read that as much less about their relationship and more about I don't understand why the public knowing about me hurts me. That's kind of how I read it.
Right. Okay. I could see that. Yeah. Anything else on this scene here, or should we talk about Moriarty?
No, I mean, aside from just it being like another example of loving the like chemistry between the characters, I really liked it.
It works really well. Okay, so meanwhile, this is sort of our plot gets started. Meanwhile, Moriarty has been freed from Mycroft's prison and proceeds to break into the Tower of London, where the crown jewels are kept, while simultaneously opening the bank vault at the Bank of England and unlocking all the cells at Pentonville Prison via his mobile phone. Before smashing the crown jewels case, he writes the words "Get Sherlock" in reverse on the outside to be seen by the security cameras. He then allows himself to be caught wearing the jewels, sitting on the throne. So do you understand this gay joke, by the way?
He put on the Queen's stuff?
Because he's a queen?
Was that it?
Yeah, because he's a queen, because he's gay. Great, good, cool, awesome, thanks.
I never would have ever thought about that if you hadn't pointed me in that direction.
Fucking goof. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. It's like a level of like, it's not even, it's too stupid to be offensive. Like, you're not like, sometimes you look at something like this and you're like, okay, sure, but this is so dumb that it's barely offensive. It's just lazy and awkward, and they like whoever let this happen, whichever, like whether it was Moffat or Gaddis that signed off on this scene, like do better. There's just like shit and lazy, is what I would say.
Well, I mean, my big question is like, is this an instance of the audience reading too much into something that would work fine if they just leave it alone? Because like the imagery of him going and sitting on the throne and putting all the stuff on, and like that fits so well with his character. It fits so well with everything they've built up for it. So for them to not do that just because they know the audience will interpret it a certain way, like is that a legitimate writing decision?
Absolutely, because you could have him break into, like, I don't know, anything else. Like, he doesn't have to go steal the fucking crown jewels. Like, you're making a series of active choices here that are leading up to this. I always take but should the writer be accountable for the interpretation of the reader? We'll talk about that a lot next season with Bart's and Death of the Author, and I've got a bit of that at the end of this episode. But they also have the balls later in this episode to have Moriarty call attention back to it by saying, "Baby, you should see me in a crown," while he's flirting with Sherlock. So I think sometimes I would agree with you where it's like, well, should you make that decision knowing that it could be interpreted a type of way? That's your responsibility as someone crafting text, is to make that choice either direction. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion whether they should or shouldn't have done this, but the outcome of this action is it makes them seem like this is just like truly a lazy decision, if nothing else, I guess is my thought there.
Another interesting I well, another way to think about the interpretation is it so depends on your nationality because, like in if I had ever sat and thought about it, I would have realized that it's the female's crown and not the male's crown. But naturally, in my head, I just am like, it's the king's crown. He's wearing the king's crown.
Right, because you don't have that context. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I would have thought about it, I would have been like, oh yeah, it's always a queen. But watching the episode, it's a guy sitting there. He's wearing a crown, so naturally, I think king. So it could be interpreted completely differently depending on which part of the world is more associated with having the different heads of royalty.
I suppose that's probably true. Some other small notes I just had here, and I don't want to. I'm just going to explain this and then explain why I don't necessarily think it's a problem. This is very like TV hacking, in the sense that each of Moriarty's app has like individual animated icons. This is going to sound really cinema sins, but if you were going to design malware to do this, you would make the malware look like anything else except the thing it's doing. One of the things that's like obvious about security is obfuscation, which is the idea of like, if you're going to write a program that breaks into a bank, you're going to want it to look like a program that's doing something else if you get caught doing that. But TV has a requirement to represent these things, so like I don't mind it. I just think it's always worthy of note in these crime and procedural shows where they imagine technology visually rather than literally, and I think that's fine.
It's funny because I had the same note about the apps because that bugged it at first. I didn't think about them as a second time at all, but the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me on multiple levels. The biggest problem I have with it, like from the Cinema Sins perspective, is that they serve no point in the story aside from he wanted them so that all it does is it sends an automated text message. That's literally all him pushing that button does. So like in the story, Moriarty just wanted that animation. He wanted to hit the bank button and have that animation instead of pulling up his text app and sending a text like every other normal human would. So I just thought it was hilarious that he actually paid an app developer and spent weeks working with this guy to develop an app that would send a text message and have this specialized, animation and all of this stuff. And in the world, that might make sense, but that was only for the audience like you just described.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem that I have with that is that this is one of those cheap ways that filmmakers use to trick the audience into thinking something. We see him use an app to break into the bank, and then the audience is convinced that he used an app to break into the bank. So they basically just lied to us by doing that, which we've seen multiple times with them doing the same thing of misleading the audience right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because we can't be smarter than the characters, so we must have different information to them, and we can't solve this stuff. So they just straight up lie to you about what happens here. So yes, I think in that sense, I do find it pretty egregious. I guess at least the practice of, in the absence of that exact point, the practice of visualizing it this way, I think is fine.
Yeah. As far as like the scene playing out and everything, like I loved it. I loved the transitions. I loved the banker sitting there sipping his coffee, and then he just pours it on himself when he sees everything was so beautifully done, and the headphones in, and Moriarty's dancing while all this is going on, and then using the diamond to break in is theoretically
that's
work.
Actually one of the only ways to break bulletproof glass.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought that was legit.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna ask that, so I did a bit of research. Diamonds are so hard they can cut the crystal lattice, and it's a bit like your cell phone screen, where if it has one crack, then the structural integrity is essentially ruined. And so what you do is you just need to sever the crystal lattice in enough places that you can then punch through it with enough force, because it'll distribute and create pressure. So fun fact, actually the best way to break bulletproof glass. So there you go.
Okay, so if I want to break into someone's car, I just got to go get a diamond.
I think you can just get a crowbar, to be honest. I don't think you need to be going out there like that. How many cars? It's America. Every car has bulletproof glass, I guess. You're gearing up for the apocalypse over there. Ridiculous. But essentially, he lets himself get caught. I haven't really jotted this down in my notes, but there is sort of a montage that occurs that gets us to the trial, where we sort of see various bits and pieces coming together. We see Moriarty kind of, being taken into the trial. We see Sherlock and John preparing and that sort of thing. I have some notes on the montage. Is there anything that you wanted to call out, I guess, on the robbery and the montage before we get to the trial?
Was all of that before the bathroom kitty scene?
Before the bathroom kitty scene happens. Yeah, we can talk about it because we can talk about that before the before Sherlock's testimonial. So yeah, we can talk about that now.
Okay. Yeah, that's the last note that I had, or the next note that I had, was specifically about that, because I don't understand why it's there, aside from that they needed a way to introduce her character, but like structurally it doesn't really serve a purpose. It feels like the only reason that is there is so that she could have her gotcha line later on and say, "You
Yes.
repel me." Like that's the only point of having that scene the way that it is in there.
Yeah. So, okay, what I might do is I might just set up the structural stuff that's happening here, and then we can probably drill into that, because this is one of the first times where, like, this whole scene, I'll set it up in a second, but that entire scene just need not exist. It does nothing for the story except set up that, like, witty gotcha line later. So again, when we talk about this idea of the aesthetic of this show and the dialogue style, this is a perfect example of they wanted to have her say that, and they needed to find a way to kind of self-justify that textually. So I guess as a bit of context, so Sherlock is called to testify at Moriarty's trial. Before he actually goes up and testifies, he's cornered in the bathroom by Kitty, who's a journalist. She's kind of posing as a fan, tries to seduce him, and then he does a bunch of magic Sherlock mind-powered bullshit to work out that she's such and such a this and such a that, and he basically tells her to piss off. Well,
she has ink smeared on her arm. Like, this is one of the easiest solves that you could say that any audience member could do. It's like, oh, hey, you must work a newspaper. You've got newspaper all over you.
Well, but the funniest thing about that is she's done that on purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
To test him, which is like the weirdest shit ever. Anyway. Yeah. So they have a bit of a kerfuffle, and then, he basically says, "You repel me," and then leaves.
Huge question I had about that scene was his reaction. Was it supposed to point directly towards the woman? Because that's the impression that I got, was she says, "I'm smart," and his reaction was, "Are you smart? Because I've met the only smart woman in existence, and you're not her." That's kind of how I interpreted it.
I think it's entirely possible. That's what's happening here. I think the idea is that yes. I don't know how to say this without kind of really making it sound like the show hates women, or at least the text positions itself in opposition to women. But I think the idea is that Irene Adler is the only woman kind of equal intelligence to Sherlock Holmes at this stage. We're going to get a character later. But the idea, the notion is that it would never occur to Sherlock that a woman who is a regular person, like she's a smart reporter, but she's just, for all intents and purposes, a regular person, might be a tool that Moriarty might bring to bear in this scheme. There's this kind of, I think the other thing it's just trying to do at a structural level, and whether it succeeds or not, I think your mileage is going to vary, is it's trying to set up the idea that Sherlock kind of thinks that normal people are idiots and wants everything to be clever, and so isn't interested in the mundane in a very specific kind of way. So yeah, I think you're right. I think this is sort of, you're not Adler, so I have literally no interest in you. And look at how quickly I dismantle you because you're not her. Is a way to read it.
Is it possible that they would have written this scene to show, because there's all these comparisons with Sherlock saying, "Moriarty, you are me, and I am you." So, like, part of the big solve as to why he was able to survive this whole thing was because of Molly, and because Moriarty did not see Molly as a human and did not see her as a friend. So this scene could be Sherlock's version of Moriarty ignoring Molly. So Sherlock
Yes.
ignored her just like Moriarty ignored Molly. This could be a juxtaposition scene for that later on. I don't know if
would
I want to give him
firmly-
that.
Look, whether or not it was intentional, and we're going to talk about Bart's. Don't worry, I keep promising that we really will. Whether it was intentional or not, it does have the effect of a cool doubling, where you go, these two guys are very similar. It turns out, and they have similar tendencies in the way that they dismiss different people and the way that they handle intelligence. I don't know when we'll discuss this in detail, but this is kind of a symptom of the kind of wounded masculinity that kind of started in the 80s, I guess, with the rise of, your TTRPGs, your tabletop role-playing games, and this idea that there was a certain subset of nerds who valorized intelligence as a sort of almost like they positioned it as morality, where like to be smart was to be moral. And there is something happening here with the text discussing and positioning Holmes and Moriarty as these kind of brilliant figures, but they don't kind of capitulate to, like, they're not wounded by their intelligence. For them it is, they don't walk around being like, none of the girls like me. They're so far above that idea of wounded masculinity. But the problem is the way that one might read this scene is like, you could imagine a shitty teenager who thinks they're really smart and is like, well, why don't women like me? Like, obviously they're they're only interested in jocks, right? It's always positioned against your typical displays of masculinity. There's a way that one could read this scene and self-insert themselves into Sherlock with that type of wounded masculinity. And so when we talk about the idea of that doubling, it's interesting to me that the show elects for Molly Hooper to then be the counterpart to this character, because Molly is deeply emotionally intelligent, infinitely patient with Sherlock, and we see their relationship change after this pretty substantially. And so I think you're right. This is an interesting double, but the cool thing about it is Moriarty uses this journalist in his scheme. Sherlock doesn't use Molly. He asks her for help. And so there is an extent to which the show seems to differentiate them at a character level, where it's saying, hey, Sherlock is, while they're very similar, there is a vulnerability here that Sherlock can display and be capable of, which shows us why he's not Moriarty. It shows us why he's different. So should we talk about, okay, so do you want to talk about the trial then?
Yeah, the only note that I had before the trial even ends was to be curious to talk about the gum scene when Moriarty has the woman put her hand in his pocket to feed him gum.
I was going to not talk about it because I was like, I just don't want to think about the way this show thinks about women and queerness and sexuality.
Does he just hit on everything? Because that was almost the vibe that I got that they were trying to go for. Was
Yeah,
just like,
if you're smart and evil, you're probably bisexual.
so this is like a Captain Jack thing. Where it's
this
just...
is a Captain Jack thing. This is a Eurus thing. This is just, if you're smart and evil, you have to be queer. It's like, cool, awesome, great. The only coded queer characters in this show are the supervillains. Thanks, Steve. I don't know what the hell this is trying to do other than show that he's in control. I think that's the most generous reading. He's not worried.
Yeah, because like from a viewer, like I can't imagine how many people watch that and they're like, why is this woman putting her hands in the pants of a criminal? Like, is that normal for those officers in that particular part of the country?
It raises so many. It's very confusing. I chose not to think about it too hard because I value my sanity. I guess let me set up this scene. So
wait, bigger question that I just realized bugs the stew out of me.
Okay.
The gum was not wrapped up in anything. And I have washed too many pieces of gum that weren't wrapped up in anything, and then they're stuck to your trousers, and you can't get it out, and then it's just this hard lump of dried gum. So why didn't he have it in a wrapper?
What are you talking? What kind of gum situation are you having? What? What do you mean? You just walking around with gum, not in a packet all the time, just like what? What?
So that's all it was. Like she pulled it out, and it was like it wasn't wrapped up in a wrapper. It was just a piece of gum that was sitting in his pocket. I have done that, and then I go
What?
and wash
What?
wash the pants without thinking about it, and then the gum melts in the wash, and then
Oh my god.
those pants are ruined.
Yeah, that would
So
be
I'm like, how
bad.
smart is this guy? Where he's just leaving gum around in his
Well, he's not going to
pockets like
forget,
that.
is he? He's a super genius. I love these little glimpses into your life and just what all is happening in your head, because that's fucking wild.
I really want
why
you to
would you
draw
ever
me like.
put it not in a packet? Like, I don't like. I get it. For the scene, it's because it's much more visually clear what it is, right? It's just a bit of filmmaking. But you're like, yeah, but I've done that before. Let me tell you why it's a bad idea.
So I guess to defend myself, sometimes
Yeah, go on.
so it was like one of those like really tiny pieces, and sometimes those will come in like a jar that's like
Yeah.
like a big thing.
I know what you mean.
And so like I'll have that sitting out in my car, and I'll like grab a stick or grab a little piece when I'm going into going into the store, going in church or whatever, and I might not have it for like 30 minutes, and it's just sitting in my pants pocket, and then you might forget about it, and then you might wash
my
the
God.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that could happen to that. I definitely sounds like a thing that could happen.
This was a beautiful
someone.
segue.
Yeah, that was good. Well, Sherlock explains to Goofy. Sherlock explains to the court that Moriarty is a criminal mastermind, a criminal for hire. During the trial, Moriarty does not speak a word and doesn't even mount a defense. Despite this, so because he doesn't mount a defense, the judge recommends he be found guilty, but he is acquitted completely. We find out a bit later this is because he threatened each of the members, each of the families of the jury. I don't really have any like notes on this. I mean, I guess so. Sherlock deliberately gets himself found in contempt of court so he can talk to Moriarty. We don't see that conversation, but it's fine. The only other thing yeah.
There were some cool things with the jury. I wish that the director had gone a little bit further, because the way that I read it was like each of the actors in the jury, like they knew what was supposed to be happening, and some of them acted like a normal human would, and then some of them just kind of sat there and stared. So like all of them were supposed to be displaying, or all of them should have displayed extreme guilt, because they know that they are getting blackmailed into letting this guy off free who just legitimately threatened to kill their families, right? So you actually see two of the jurors who are sitting like center, they refuse to look up. They're staring at their feet the entire time. Then when the one lady, the head juror, when she stands up and starts to make her announcement, two of the other ones, they go from looking straight to looking down at their feet. So now you've got four of them who are all looking down. And then before the one lady even makes her announcement, you see all of the different signs. Thinking of that show like Lie to Me, like you see all the different like puckerings of her mouth and stuff that show like she does not like what she is about to say. So there's a lot of subtle stuff in there that shows that kind of what's going on behind the scenes, but I don't know if that was intentional or if it was the actors making the right call for that situation.
Yeah. Either way, it's a really good scene. I like it.
Yeah,
I
loved everything in that.
Andrew Scott just like absolutely kills it in this role. Like he was just born to play Moriarty. I should say, after being acquitted, Moriarty visits. Okay, so I just want to explain one thing before we leave the trial. I got to explain the next scene because it is important. So after being acquitted, Moriarty visits Sherlock and explains he has plans. We'll talk about that scene in a second. The thing that's important here is that Sherlock knows Moriarty's going to come visit. This is like likely to happen if this is the outcome of the trial anyway, right? Like if he's not guilty, this is most likely, Moriarty's going to come visit. Sherlock is expecting this. I'm unclear as to the methodology or the design behind Sherlock getting thrown into the prison cell next to Moriarty if they're going to talk later anyway. Like I felt like it was they might have had their plan with that they were going to do something with it, and then just maybe another scene got cut or it just didn't end up panning out.
The way that I read that,
show the utility.
I have no proof, but the way that I read that was that they were not literally in the cell next to each other, but that was one of those camera tricks where they make it look like two rooms are right next to each other. And the only reason I read it that way is because it makes no sense for them to be in a room right next to each other and not talk. They would have already had this talk had they been next to each other. So I think it was just a filmmaking decision that they shouldn't have done because it is confusing. Yeah,
okay. That makes sense. I mean, either way, okay, so Do you have anything else on the courtroom, or I have so many notes on the next scene.
I have only like 2 notes about their talk in the flat. But the first one is like right when he's walking in, and it's something that I wish that they would have done, because they actually showed him like breaking in. Like you hear him like fiddling with the lock before it opens, and like I would have paid money for you just to hear a click, and then when he walks in, he just closes up his key ring, because he has had a key to Sherlock's house on his own key ring for years. That would have been amazing. I would have loved that so much.
Good rewrite. I like it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, do you have anything else? Because I have so much here that I want to get into.
It's much later in their conversation, but
Okay.
there was a gay joke thrown in there that I'm not sure if you got or not.
All right. Well, I don't think I did, but we'll work our way toward it. As I said before, Andrew Scott is like acting the hell out of this entire scene. He's so goddamn good. It's the thing that my note here is like you can really feel his theater background. Like you can feel his stage performance here in a very real way. He absolutely steals the scene from Cumberbatch. He's brilliant.
Yeah, if anyone has not seen it, Sir Michael Caine did a brilliant like acting methodology class that they taped back in like the 70s, or I don't know, it was a long time ago, but it was like for free on YouTube, and I've watched it like multiple times, because it's so, there's so much amazing stuff, like all the way down to just how the camera like reacts differently from the theater audience, and like when you're looking at someone, pick an eye. Because so many actors who are inexperienced, they'll be looking back and forth between your 2 eyes, because that's what normal humans do. Like watch your eyes when you're talking to someone, and they never really know where to look. The good actors focus on one single eyeball, so that it's a really steady, you know. And it's all
cool.
these little tidbits like that he gives. So that's a really good video to watch, and I'd be interested to see how many of the same things we could pick out from this guy's performance.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about Moriarty's claim here, which is that he has a few lines of computer code that can crack any computer defense. Now, to a normal person, you go, okay, that sounds really fantastical. This isn't that far-fetched in a certain sense. Most security relies on a handful of similar, or at least like, if not similar, sometimes like identically structured encryption methodology. Not to say that like writing a computer program like this would be easy, but a lot of systems are very similar in a way that you could probably get a lot of coverage with some pretty repeatable patterns. This is why like a lot of military networks exist in isolation from the internet, or they have certain portals to the internet that are like protected and encrypted and encoded, or like they have very specifically accessible subnetworks, because this kind of attack is like pretty doable. It's just most people don't have a reason to do it because it takes a lot of investment and time. So the idea, because this gets paid off later, where Moriarty's like, you didn't think I had a code that could do that, you fucking doofus. And I like the idea of him really playing on the fact that like this is probably possible, and he's just, because like he broke into the security of those 3 facilities anyway. Like his exploit is not the computer code, it's the humans, which is the weakest part of any security network. I just thought it was clever. I like the idea of this feeling realistic to Sherlock, and then the rug pull later.
Well, one thing about that though is that the way that they treated that code was that it was a cure-all for everything. So I think that if they had treated it as it was a way to hack into, I don't know the best way to explain it, because like they said that this code could rewrite Moriarty's identity. It could get rid of Brooke, and it could blah blah blah. Like they made it sound like anything that you told it to do, it could do, which is too fantastical to believe. But if you talk about it the way you're talking about it, then it seems totally believable. So it's like they presented it a way to the audience that makes it unbelievable, even though, like you said, it could practically be a thing.
Yeah, and again, this is at its core, right? You have the stylistic impulse of, well, how do we undo Richard Brooke? Well, we need this magic wand that so we can have that drop. The other shoe drops later, where that never existed. Stylistically, you want that from your aesthetic perspective, but structurally, it's like, well, you're asking your audience to believe this, and then making fun of them for buying into the same thing Sherlock did, when you had no reason and no ability to guess that it might have been fake. because as you say, we get shown the device, the interface that he uses, so we get visually told it exists. Then later on, the show is like, hey, you should believe it exists for the purposes of the plot. And then it goes, actually, no, we lied to you that time. And the whole time you're supposed to believe it, and then you don't believe it, and then you're supposed to have not believed it in the first place, even though it's so fantastical it couldn't be real. There's just a lot. There's a lot of like winding and unwinding, which
Bluebell is real.
Huh?
So Bluebell is real.
Bluebell.
Like they keep doing this. It's like
Yeah.
they prove something fantastical exists by doing some other little thing, and they just keep repeating the same thing in every episode.
Yeah, they just twist and untwist and untwist, and it's going to get to a point next season where it almost becomes unwatchable, where you're like, I don't understand what's going on here. Like, this is like illegible content. So, okay, I like this scene a lot. On my second rewatch of this episode for this recording, I realized that it does something really well. So I want to talk about a concept that I pulled from... So Sherlock's fatal flaw, in a certain sense, or one of his fatal flaws, is this idea that at a conceptual level, Sherlock believes that all doors should open to him. And what I mean by that is his intelligence is this like brute force weapon for reality, in the same way that Moriarty's code is, I guess, for computers, right? One of the things that Sherlock is going to have to grapple with and understand, or at least this is what the show presents is the thing he needs to work through, is the realization that some doors and things will remain closed to him. In some sense, this is the final problem that Moriarty is referring to. When we get to the end of the show, I'll relitigate this in a lot more detail. The final problem is like Sherlock cannot win every battle through his sheer intelligence. He must engage with his empathy, right? That is literally how the show ends. And this idea of not all doors will open to him, which is to say, you know, metaphorically, he has to accept the fact that some things you just can't brute force with your intelligence. Intelligence is not by itself enough. I want to illustrate this just by explaining a small passage from one of the best written games of all time, which is Disco Elysium. And I think this will probably strike a chord with what I'm alluding to. So in Disco Elysium, you play as Harrier Dubois, who is described as he's a detective. And he's described as a human can opener for his ability to like make people tell him what he needs to know in the weirdest, most esoteric ways. A lot of the game is you know, through Harry breaking down people to learn the truth, it's a lot of finding ways into locked doors, into different areas to uncover evidence and things like that. But the bit I want to hone in on is on the coast by the sea, there is a single bunkered door that looms from the sand. You cannot open this door. It doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how many checks you engage with, you cannot open the door. So the problem as follows. Quote, "God damn it, it cannot be. A disgrace. The door on the coast. You remember the one, right? The one that leads to the abandoned supply depot? Why in the name of all that's holy does it not open? Why? There has to be a way to get through that unopenable door. By gods, you're the police. All doors are supposed to open before you. What will the others at the precinct think if you can't open a goddamn door? There must be a way." End quote. And then after your character thinks on this for a few days, the solution as follows. Quote, "There is no way to open the supply depot door. Accept it. You cannot open all the doors. You have to integrate this into your character. Some doors will remain forever closed. Even if every single other door will open at one time or another, maybe to a key, or maybe to some sort of tool meant for opening doors, this one will never cede to such commands. A realization crucial to personal growth. Crucial." End quote. And I think for me, in an abstracted sense, right, this is exactly what Moriarty is providing here. There is no computer code that can crack the world open. There is no way to outsmart Moriarty, right? Some doors are just closed to you. Not everything can be solved by this chosen weapon of intellect. And I just wanted to try and illustrate that because it's the real thematic thing this episode is going for. And then obviously the aesthetic requirements of the show and the paratextual requirements of the show undermine that kind of character growth for Sherlock. And obviously as the episode ends, we get an outcome which completely undermines it in a way that is emblematic of where the show is going to go next. Yeah, do you have any? You looked very pensive that whole time.
I feel like I could talk for an hour about what you just were discussing, and I was trying to figure out if I could even succinctly talk about any of it. Um, but I find that so fascinating because I see so many people that have that same thought process where they think that intellect can just break down anything, and like I've seen that, not to put myself on the Sherlock level, but like I've seen that so much, like in video games especially. Like every time that we lose a game, talking about like a competitive player versus player kind of thing, like whenever we lose, it's very rare for me to say they were more skilled. It's almost always I see intellectually we did not work together in these instances, and like there are ways we could have thought our way out of it. And there are so many, like when you're talking about this unbreakable door, and I'm like, there are 5 different things I could think of right now. Dynamite, dig through the sand behind the door. Like there are ways to open a door, but then I'm like, I could never fly. I know that I will never, that door is closed to me. So there are certain doors that are locked that you will never ever be able to open. But at the same time, there's also those people that will always be trying to think their way out of a situation because they can see that there are ways to think out of that particular situation.
Yes.
It's weird. I'm like trying to agree with you and argue with you at the same time, and I don't know how to handle that.
It's one of these things where I mean I think it's a real it is one of those things that if you are relatively intelligent and you have found this ability to solve problems pretty reliably with intelligence, it is one of these things like you have to accept at some point. It is critical to self growth and realization is like, yes, like not all doors can open to you, and that is okay.
And one of the biggest things, like one of the biggest things with Sherlock, but in particular, is that he only thinks about his intellect being able to open doors, and he so rarely relies on other people or even asks other people. And multiple times, John is the one that solves the problem, and he never is like, "Hey, John, do you have any ideas?"
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. It also, well, that's exactly right, because that's a different tool, right? What we see at the end of this episode is he asks Molly for help. Not all, he cannot open all doors by himself. Sometimes you need others, and what is important in others is not their intelligence necessarily, but their empathy or your relationship to them, or your trust in them. And so again, when I say that the way this episode ends deeply undercuts that lesson, we'll talk about it when we talk about the conclusion here, but like this is almost a really fascinating piece of character growth for Sherlock. It is pretty quickly unwound in the next episode, but they almost get a really cool, deep emotional arc for him that is like really subtextual in a way that is brilliant. Like it's not overt. It's sort of succinct. It's clean. It's really good mirroring and rhyming with Moriarty and Kitty. And it's possible that it was just like a complete accident. And we have to accept that both possibilities are true in the same way that we have to accept that like our instinct is, but I can work out how to open that door. But also you have to accept that, we can't open the door. So I think there's like some interesting paratextual stuff with trying to solve the underlying drive of the authors and what they're trying to achieve with this text versus what's actually in it and its effects on the audience reading it.
Yeah. And we don't need to keep like hammering on this, but I just realized like this is something you see in Big Bang Theory all the time, and I don't know if it's a stereotype of intellectual characters or if it's just like we're seeing something that is really true to real life, that when they come up against a problem, their first thought is not usually let's take a physical action or let's go ask for help. Their first thought is always let's do some math, let's think our way through this, because that's what intellectuals do. So I don't know. It tracks true, while at the same time it might not be the best for his particular character, his mentality and all that, like you were saying.
Yeah. But I mean, the Big Bang Theory, and I like the idea of like us having a brief conversation about something this complicated. The thing with the Big Bang Theory that's interesting is what the growth of the journey of those characters and the work that they have to do is accept that there are other tools they need to develop in order to be fully realized human beings. Intelligence is not enough. They need to work on empathy and humor and kindness and forgiveness, and they need to grow and change as people. And to what extent you as an individual reader will find those things happen in that show. Your mileage is always going to vary, but I think I'm being generous here because I think that show has a lot of challenges when it comes to this sort of writing. But I mean, the general idea is like it's not enough to just be a super smart guy who really likes D&D and Star Trek. You need to learn how to communicate with people and socialize, and you need to learn how to empathize with someone and put their needs ahead of your own. And so there are some things that we see those characters do over time in service of what and at the expense of who that they're laughing at. We don't need to get into again, but certainly I completely agree. I think it's a really good contemporary touchstone to this moment. Another good one is Doctor Who, which is obviously running at the same time, and we have a pretty contemporary and parallel expression of intelligence in that character. So yeah. It is certainly something in the cultural zeitgeist at the time. And I think it really is just a result of like, you had that boom in the 80s and 90s of these like the wounded intelligent kid, and those are now grown-ups making television shows, and so they're exploring those ideas and trying to come to terms with them.
The Doctor Who comparison is so interesting because it's on the surface level, you think he does the same thing where he's trying to think his way out of every problem, but he does it in a completely different level because he's actually, in almost every instance, he's trying to empathize his way out of a situation. He's trying to figure out why the bad guy is hurt or why the bad guy is doing the thing and how to emotionally help the bad guy. And frequently that's when he solves the problem. It's not, it's thinking, but it's in a completely different way from Sherlock.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating? I mean, obviously, I assume you're referring to kind of the transition into the Moffat era. I like the Tennant and the Eccleston and Smith to an extent, but that falls away pretty quickly. Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? It's a very, very different kind of exercise. Okay, well, you said you had something on the later part of that conversation, the gay joke. So hit me with what you got.
I don't recall what brings it up, but Moriarty starts talking about John, and he's just kind of mumbling in the background while Sherlock is trying to ask him questions. And the mumblings that he is saying is, I should get myself a live-in one. That's what he says.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here and I'm like, what slang is that? And it took a while to find a description, but a person who lives at the residence of his or her sexual partner without being married. That is the slang for a live-in one.
Got it. Yep. Really simple. Just a straightforward, just a joke about what if John and Sherlock were gay, and that's funny, you know? Jokes, comedy, humor, good stuff. Awesome.
I also don't really get the, I don't get the IOU. I don't know if it matters, but it's like they made it seem so important, and I don't understand.
I think it was supposed to. So okay, God, do you want me to tell you? Because I can, because I have it from Tumblr.
Okay.
It's really long. So okay, do you want to just set it up for the listener really quickly, like what you're talking about?
So
and then I'll explain it.
So on, he's carving an apple during the whole time in this scene, and then at the very end, Sherlock picks up the apple, and it says IOU, and it, like literally just the letters I, O, and U. And then that's been a consistent thing throughout it. It's like that is the threats to him, like I owe you, and I'm going to come and get you. And so we see the letters IOU painted on windows outside the police station, and then I think there's another reference somewhere else. And then he actually says, before Sherlock picks up the apple, he says I owe you, and then he repeats it again. And it's like, what do you owe him for? Because like Sherlock he's coming after your empire or something. Is that what you owe him for? Like, I've never really understood what they were going for with that entire thought process. Not just the letters, but why?
So, okay. So something that happens later is that Sherlock is analyzing the glycerin molecule in Bart's lab, which is found as a result of the kidnapping. When asked about it, he claims it's nothing. He's just making a mental note. And he mutters IOU under his breath as he's looking at the molecule. Now, This is not a proven thing. I'm just going to give you like the theory. This comes from evachristine.tumblr.com. And so the question is, what if IOU refers to chemical elements, iodine, oxygen, and uranium? What if, like in the blind banker, each symbol is a number? The atomic numbers for iodine, oxygen, and uranium are 53, 8, and 92. My first inclination is to assume that this is a secret code. But this is a TV show, not the CIA, so 53892 is probably something really, really simple. Like in The Blind Banker, it was the key that was in a book, London A to Z. In this episode, there's Grimm's fairy tales. Moriarty leaves it at the crime scene, knowing Sherlock will be aware of this. Okay, this person does their own textual research, which is amazing. So I want to read this next passage because it's incredible. From what I can see in the screenshots, Moriarty's book was printed in the Great Britain by Empire Press, Norwich. I browsed through my school's library database and came up with Jared & Sons Ltd, the Empire Press, Norwich. I couldn't find this book anywhere, so I'd wager it's pretty rare. Luckily, we are shown the insides of Moriarty's book, so I was able to compare page numbers, fairy tale numbers, illustrations, and text placement in several different editions. The 1944-1972 Pantheon books turn out to be an exact copy of Moriarty's edition. This is where it gets great, because now they're doing, like, there's, like, actual, primary research. Each fairy tale in this edition has its own number. So what if IOU refers to Grimm's fairy tales 53, iodine's atomic number, 8, oxygen's atomic number, and 92, uranium's atomic number? John, what kind of kidnapper leaves clues? Sherlock, the sort that likes to boast, the sort that thinks it's all a game. He sat in our flat and said these exact words to me. All fairy tales need a good old-fashioned villain. So I'm going to quickly skim through this bit, but basically, Grimm's fairy tale 53 is Little Snow White. The evil queen makes 3 attempts to kill Snow White, just like Moriarty makes 3 attempts to kill Sherlock, the first 2 being the poison pill and the Semtex jacket in the pool. On the last attempt, both villains bring an apple to their intended victim. I'm going to skip ahead. Blah, 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 blah. Don't need this. After his acquittal, he comes to Sherlock's home and proclaims himself a good old-fashioned villain, drinks from a cup with a crown on it, carves IOU into an apple, and tells Sherlock to learn to like riddles. Sherlock takes the apple and studies the 3 letters, looking intrigued. Essentially, what it seems to me, like as I'm skimming through this, is that it's then this because he's wearing the crown and there's a bunch of screenshots. The idea is that Sherlock has worked out it's Snow White, which makes it which then the idea is like that's what gives him the idea for the Snow White stunt, which is like dying, coming back to life after getting rid of the bad apple. This person acknowledges this could be a coincidence, but like it may be, him working out that Moriarty's given him the way to get out of this or something. Like it's him boasting, being like, if only you'd solved this, you could have survived. The other ones are less convincing. It's then like the strange musician and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, that's the general idea is like Moriarty has encoded into IOU based on these elements, referencing Grimm's fairy tales, which he brings up a lot. He's kind of giving Sherlock the solution to the final problem and it's like a brag to be like, if only you'd worked it out, you could have survived.
The problem is, I think there's 0 chance that the writers went through that legwork to figure out all these additions with the book to actually put that stuff in there in the first place.
Absolutely not. Yeah, they barely thought about that scene for more than like 10 minutes. They were like, da 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 da. Okay, just go, just sit there. Yeah, I think it's just supposed to be cool and threatening.
I will. That seems more realistic, so I'll accept that. I loved what this other person did way more. I want that to be my headcanon, but
it gets crazier. I'll read you this and then we can move on. So this is toward the end of this, what is literally an essay. Quote, so here's my crackpot theory. Sherlock knows Moriarty's plans because he has solved Moriarty's IOU riddle, but doesn't let Moriarty in on it. Sherlock is used to taking risks to prove he's clever, but now his friends' lives are at stake, and he actually has friends. He's risking life to play ordinary Sherlock for their sake. And then this person goes on to acknowledge like that there's a lot of other evidence that people connect to this that's outlandish. Yeah, but I mean the idea is that this is sort of that Moriarty giving him the pieces he needs to work out how to survive. And then Sherlock working it out and not revealing he's worked it out, I suppose. So, okay, getting back on track. Meanwhile, John is summoned to see Mycroft, who explains that a number of professional assassins have moved into flats on 221B Baker Street and asks him to watch out for Sherlock. I have a question. What purpose does John awkwardly beefing up and just screwing around in the Diogenes Club serve? Like, why wouldn't the driver have escorted him in? What does this add? I was very confused by this scene.
Ironically, I wasn't, because it tracked so closely with him in other scenes where he'll just, like, he has his own particular brand of social awkwardness, even though he's always chastising Sherlock for his. But, and it may just be like a military thing where military men are just, they'll just go in, they'll be more blunt and just flat out ask people and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in any other normal situation, walking up to a stranger and asking them for directions is not that big of a deal. So really the only issue is him having a mild freak out when no one would talk to him. And at that point, any intelligent person might get some kind of clue that...
you might clue in, maybe a little bit. Yeah.
I am curious to talk about that club itself and find out how much, like, other people know about it, because I had to look stuff up, and it was so cool once I did.
To talk me through that process. So I mean, because I knew what it was because I read the original books, but yeah, talk me through what the process was you went through and what you learned.
So every time that I've seen this episode, I just thought that this was a like standard gentleman's club where you go, you smoke cigars, you just like get away from normal life, be by yourself for a while. Only they took it a step further, and they were like, no talking. There's one room where you're allowed to talk. The rest of the time, it's literally just sit and read and chill and have your smokes and have your whiskey, and like that's it. But then, as I started doing started doing research on it, and the club originally was founded for like literally antisocial people, and it was founded so that they would not have to talk to each other when they were there. And it is so cool when you look at it. Every chair in there is facing the wall. They built the room knowing the purpose of the room, so they built it so that even the participants in there, like the actors, were not facing each other because they knew that the actors weren't supposed to talk. So I love the writers don't get a lot of stuff right when they're doing their homages back to the original source, but I love the detail that they went to with this particular scene setting.
They do a really good job of this. I agree. Also, fun fact, Mycroft Holmes co-founded it, which tracks completely. So there you go.
I don't know where to put this note. I had it right before the club thing. And I said that this episode spans an absurdly long time frame, and we sort of saw this in the woman episode, but this one feels like it's far longer. There were 6 weeks between the robberies and the trial. There were 2 months between Sherlock meeting Moriarty and this club scene, and then there were 18 weeks between Sherlock dying and John going back to visit his therapist. Then there may have been more time involved in that we don't know about, but a long time takes, this one episode.
Yeah, the show's relationship to time is fascinating. Initially the episodes were very contained. You had that first episode that takes place basically in like 3 days. Then as it goes on, that slips further and further. I think it's a symptom of the focus of the stories they're telling. Like, I think if you're telling a detective story, one of the things that you do is, like, that you're always on the clock racing against time, right? Like, you're always trying to solve it before the next murder happens or before XYZ or what have you. This very much moves into a mode of, like, the time is just a servant to the story that they're telling. Time is not time has no agency. The story has agency, and time will work around the story they're trying to tell, is my intuition.
I mean, it's also a way that they could make all of the stuff be or feel more realistic for the audience, because like there is no legitimate reason to inform the audience that 3 weeks or whatever have passed between Moriarty being arrested and now the trial happening. Like it doesn't give the audience anything else to deal with. There's no information that might help with a solve or anything, knowing that 3 weeks have passed. Nothing has changed in those 3 weeks. So it's just, this is a logical amount of time that would take between an arrest and a trial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about it is a montage would achieve the same thing, and there is a montage in there. But you don't need to say 3 weeks. You can just have a montage of stuff happening, and we can intuit some amount of time. One of the challenges that you introduce in text when you make temporal claims, which is to say, like, put a specific time around something, it can call attention to itself in a way that there's not a simple way to explain this. But in acknowledging that exactly 3 weeks have transpired, we as the reader either assume that there is some significance to be placed against that. So in that we should think, well, 3 weeks is a meaningful amount of time. This will come up later, or it causes and puts in stone. I don't know if there's not a better word for it, but you end up with like a canonical timeline of events, and so it makes it much harder later on when characters describe different events. It can make it a lot harder to be consistent with your own internal world and your own internal world building if you've created these hard barriers about, well, this happened 3 weeks ago and that happened. Whereas if you need to, say it's a really easy example, something happens and you don't get a timestamp, later on, someone could recontextualize that to be a certain amount of time if they needed to work around a future plot point. And so in putting these labels in, you kind of like hem your storytelling into these exact events in this exact span of time. And it's just one of those things, like it's a way that writers end up backing themselves into corners in a very real sense. You're often a lot better trying to convey a sense of time passing and try to convey the scale of it rather than explicitly say, oh, it was 3 weeks. You know, you're better off saying like some weeks later or something like that. The more vague you are, the more it allows you to kind of then use and manipulate that content later on if necessary for bringing things together or smoothing out other internal consistency errors. So it's an interesting observation that I didn't even think about.
Yeah, I'm kind of reminded of Tolkien and like the months and months that Sam and Frodo spent trekking across all of these different landscapes, and in the movie it's just you get a little clip and then a little clip in the snow and then a little clip in a grassy thing and then a little clip on a rocky thing, and
that's all you need. Yeah.
And if they give too much more, you're like, okay, 3 weeks have passed, where's Aragorn?
Imagine like Frodo turns to Sam and he goes, Sam, boy, it's been a long 3 months and 2 days since we left the party. And you'd be like, huh? What? Yeah. Really, really good observation there. Okay, well, I think now's a good time to talk about the turning point of the episode, and then we'll take a break and talk about the ending. Because we're kind of running out of plot here and we're about to get into the nitty-gritty stuff. So Sherlock and John investigate a kidnapping of a US ambassador's children, which is a carefully orchestrated plot by Moriarty to implicate that Sherlock has been staging all of his cases himself. As this occurs, Lestrade and Donovan begin to suspect Sherlock might be a fake behind the murders and all of his previous cases. At the behest of his boss, Lestrade arrests Sherlock, but Sherlock escapes with John. They also realize Moriarty's Get Sherlock has convinced the criminal underworld that Moriarty gave Sherlock the computer code he used to pull off his heists, and that it can bypass all security systems, making him public enemy number one by both the police and the hitmen. So I summarized a lot of stuff, but to be honest, the stuff that happens is kind of, it's pretty pat. Like there's nothing about it that is really out of pattern. Talk me through, so I guess to add a slightly bit more detail, not that it's particularly important. Basically, like the children of the ambassador are at this children's home. They get abducted, and there is like a glycerin molecule that Sherlock is able to identify and takes a sample of, which is the thing he's going to, he sees a footprint and he's going to, track this down. Something that I just want to acknowledge, because if I don't, someone's going to email me about it, is that yes, it is deeply ironic that the show frames Sherlock's deductions as impossible and then refuses to explain to us how they work. I acknowledge that. I literally wrote that on my blog at the time on Tumblr. I get it. I know. It's silly. It's goofy. It's goofy for them to be like, yes, they must be staged, because how could anyone be this smart? And it's like, well, no one can be, because you keep lying to us about how smart, about how his smartness works. Just acknowledging that, we can move on. Talk to me, thoughts here, feelings, emotions. What do you think about this little sequence?
I don't know that this is worth delving into but based off like what you just were saying about how none of the other characters think that he can be real because he's too good to be real, but he is such a drama queen that he explains explicitly how he solves every single case. So they understand, they see the evidence, they know the logic for everything that he has ever solved because he loves showing off for people. Mm-hmm. So the only reason that point is even in this story is because the writers just needed that point. They needed the characters to not trust him, and that was their way of doing it, was to feign that they couldn't believe his past his past success, even though they had witnessed and he had shown them. So anyway, I was just an interesting thought that it doesn't really track logically, but I understand, because that's one of the things that you've taught me so well with all of our talks with here and in Obi-Wan, is that so many of the things I want to analyze, they're only in there because the writers needed a method of telling this part of the story, or this little subplot. That's the only reason that Obi-Wan is wearing that cloak in that scene, is because they needed him to for that scene. There's nothing deeper about it, which is really sad in some aspects, but it's practical.
Welcome to media criticism, baby. I get it. I think that the CinemaSins type style of criticism, I just think it has its limits. I think it just has its limits of how one can appreciate text, which is why I always try and call our shots from both sides of that fence, because I sometimes see stuff and I'm like, well, that pulled me out of it. That was obviously an error.
So speaking of CinemaSins,
go on.
The kid gets kidnapped, he sees the kidnapper through the glass on the door. Then the kid has time to get out of bed, get his invisible ink, open the bottle, write the words "help me" on the wall. Then he gets carried away. All of that before the gunman walks through the door and drags him out. Mm-hmm. I think they just should have left the words off the wall. That's the end of that. It would have been easy enough. It would have been a huge stretch that this 8-year-old kid, like the glowing footsteps weren't what led them to him. It was that they pulled the stuff off of the boot in order for Sherlock to get the solve. So is there any chance that the kid knew that? No. He was just saying, glow in the dark, they'll be able to follow the glow in the dark, they'll be able to find this invisible ink, will help them find me. That's what the kid was thinking.
Yeah, what makes you think it was the kid that did it? Like, what if Moriarty did this as part of the setup?
I never thought of that. I am so much happier with that. That's my new headcanon.
Yeah. These guys are so smart, anything's possible. So why not that? Yeah, you can explain anything away by being like, well, it was probably the super genius.
No, I loved every scene where we see Sherlock in the lab and he's actually actively doing science to get a deduction.
Yeah, I wrote that too.
That is so much. Yeah. It's so much more impactful than him just seeing this little scrap of paper in someone's pocket and saying,
it's way more interesting.
Yeah.
It just clicked for me on this viewing through the Hansel and Gretel book, is in the place where the kids are kidnapped, and then prior to that, John had received an envelope full of breadcrumbs. I just thought that was clever. It didn't click for me until this time. Can we just acknowledge how great Molly is, by the way? I just love seeing her on screen. And I adore this scene where she and Sherlock are working together, and she sort of notices that he's hiding something from John, and that there's some underlying sadness or something going on here. And the word I've written down is God, this show is so good sometimes. Because Molly, noticing Sherlock's insecurity about Moriarty and his fear of being burned down, the other note I've written under here is this show good actually, or am I just in love with Molly? I can't tell. I don't know. But I really like this scene in the lab.
I had a similar note. I said way he looked at Molly like he'd never seen her before.
God, that's exactly what it is, Dart. You've written that so well. Yes, that's exactly what it is. The acting is so fucking good in this scene. It makes me furious. And it's like he notices her he actually sees her for the first time. And he suddenly realizes why they're in each other's lives. It's fucking brilliant. God, this show's good. That's going to piss it all away in the next scene. But anyway, do you have anything else in the lab, or should we talk about the police station and the turn on Sherlock?
Yeah. My next note is at the candy factory.
Okay, I'll kind of skim through this then. So, a quick note on the police station. The Mind SFX is still goofy as hell, but
Yeah.
what I do like, the one thing that I liked, and I don't know if you did or this was like the opposite for you, because we've had really hot and cold takes on this, is when he goes into his Mind Palace map, the overhead lights dim as he distances himself from other people. And then when he interacts with John, the lights come back on and then he goes back in and they turn off again. I thought it was a cool...
I didn't put any thought into this, but I was curious when I saw that scene again, at what point in time this came out in relation to the first Iron Man film. Because they straight up duplicated the HUD effects.
Yep. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was just like an homage that they did, or if that was just, that's how they pictured. Because, I mean, that's kind of what it was when in The Hounds of Baskerville. It was kind of the same thing, but it wasn't. Because in this one, you can actually see they're kind of like in an orb around his head, and it looks like almost exactly to me like
3D tracked, yeah.
Yeah.
3D tracked his eyebrows. So Iron Man was 2008, so that had been out for 4 years by the time this came out. I suspect maybe they just had the same VFX pack in Premiere Pro. Like, it may have been that simple. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it may have just been like, that was a piece of kit that was around and it was available. Yeah. Sometimes, and this goes to what you were saying before, sometimes things are just coincidence. Or, I mean, it's probable that they saw Iron Man and they went, oh yeah, that's a cool way of visualizing, like, interiority. Let's just do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And normally I'm not the picky one about this, but I hated that solve. I hated
Which
that
one,
solve so much. The
the
flicking through all
factory?
these maps of the chocolate factories, like, out of all of this stuff to have stored in your brain, having
Stupid.
closed down candy factories.
It's so dumb. It's like a different kind of dumb though. Do you know what I mean?
And
Like, it's sort
then-
of...
How did they narrow it down by saying that a flower grew at this one? Like, all they were saying was vegetation. Vegetation is everywhere. How is this one particular flower vegetation and then other flowers aren't vegetation? Grass is vegetation. Like, okay, let's just move on. I'm about to get irate.
We gotta move on or Dart's gonna lose his mind. So Sherlock ends up, he goes into it to talk to the girl and she just screams at him. And my favorite thing is that they come out of the room and Lestrade says, don't worry, I also feel like screaming when you come into a room instead of most
know.
people. Lestrade's so great.
It's like I said, there's some comedy in this. I don't know what's this episode, that they're comedic bits. Like we skipped it earlier, but going into the trial, and John is like trying to give Sherlock advice when they're sitting in the cab, and he's like, "Don't do this," and Sherlock says, "I know," and then he says, "Don't do," and Sherlock says, "I know," and John is like, "Do you really know? Because you're gonna get in trouble," and he's like, just don't say anything mean, and Sherlock is like, I'll just be myself. No, don't be yourself. That's what I'm telling you.
He's like, have you been listening? It's so good. Yeah, it's so good.
So there's one thing in that scene, and you're gonna win an argument here from 2 episodes ago, maybe.
Yeah.
When you were talking about how overdone the sound effects were. So.
Yeah. Tell me about it, Darth.
Yep, in the scene where you're flashing back and forth between Sherlock and the kids in the candy factory, and the kids are unwrapping all of the wrappers and they're stuffing the chocolate in their mouths, and it is so overbearing. The sounds of them eating, which I know they did it on purpose. That was supposed to be, you're supposed to hear the sounds of the chewing, and it's supposed to make you uncomfortable as a viewer. But I just despised it. Oh, yeah. I hated it. I hated it so much.
It just doesn't do whatever they thought it was going to do.
But I loved it before. Like, before I wanted to argue with you so hard that I loved the scratching of the pens on the paper and all this little stuff. But this time when they did it, it took me out of it completely. And I don't know if it was just, like, was it 10 dB too high? Or, I don't know.
I think it's possible that this trick that they do with the sound effects and the whooshy whooshy and the SFX, the second you start to pay attention to it, the trick kind of stops working. Because when you really realize what's happening, you're like, oh, this is just like completely unnecessary. Like, this is not really adding anything to the story. It's just kind of here to be loud and distracting and aesthetic. And it's not used... it's rarely used in moments where it is called upon to add context or weight or dramatic tension. Like, this doesn't do anything for us except be a bit ominous and kind of annoying to watch. The solve at the end with Moriarty, they have the restraint to not give us Mind Palace woozy effects because they know to be goofy as hell in this final confrontation for Sherlock to do something like that. And yet they insist on putting it in these scenes where it's like, it served nothing.
Now that you say that, you know what I'm shocked they didn't do?
Yeah.
I'm going to say they should have done this because these writers like doing stuff like this. They should have done a scene where both Moriarty and Sherlock go into their mind palaces at the same time. And so the two characters are just standing there staring at each other. But in their heads, you're seeing all of this stuff. Like, you could totally see these writers would love that idea. I'm kind of surprised they didn't do it.
They do it later. They do it later, but they don't do it here. I think that you're right. That is absolutely something they would do. And becomes an instinct for them. Like,
yeah, they would have a Mind Palace battle to see who could find the answer first.
Yeah, exactly.
That's totally what these. Okay, I'm about to. Yeah. I don't know why I'm like getting irate over little things. Have you broken me?
Great. I've ruined you. This is what I wanted. This was what I wanted the whole time. I wanted you to see this show for what it is. Good. Lean in. Okay, really quickly, and then we have to go on a break. But really quickly, Moriarty's little TV screen thing in the taxi is so goofy. What's going on? I don't understand the purpose of... So, just to set it up, so Sherlock and John get separate cabs because Sherlock is thinking. And, like, for some reason, Moriarty has, like, filmed a little video with animated background where he's sort of teasing Sherlock and being like, the boastful detective, and he's sort of setting it up to be like, hey, I fucking got you, you're about to get your entire life ruined. And it plays on a little TV, and then Sherlock gets out of the cab and goes to confront the driver, and it's Moriarty who then sort of takes off. Really goofy little video. Just a little joker. Just a little joker guy joking, just some jokery stuff,
Yeah, I kept wondering if that was supposed to be, the idea was supposed to be that he filmed on the same set where he was filming all these kids' videos. He was, pretending to be an actor on kids' videos for I don't know how many years to sell this, this fake lie that he was doing. And so I assume he was legitimately putting out children's content during this time because
which is so funny to think about.
Yeah. Because he would go to those lengths, right? So yeah. I assumed that's why they did the video in that manner, was because he was literally using this kid set and probably the editor that does all this kid stuff. And he was like, oh, let's just make it a little bit more creepy than we normally do.
Right. Yeah. I simply would have written this differently and not done this in my television show about Sherlock fucking Holmes. I probably would not have put this scene in there of a very talented actor doing his best Joker on a television set for children. Probably not what I would have done with my version of Sherlock Holmes, but alas, here we are. Anything else before we go to break? And then we'll talk about Richard Brooke, and then we'll talk about the final climax and people's reaction to it and how it changes the discourse.
The only other note I had was that the entire idea of the candy poisoning thing is just confusing. I don't understand why it was in there, and I don't understand how they set it up to think that it made sense. Because unless I missed something, they had to unwrap every piece of candy, paint the inside of the wrapper with mercury, and then wrap every piece of candy back up. And that's the only way that the mercury got on the inside of the wrappers on the candy for the kids to eat it.
Wouldn't they just put the mercury on the wrappers at the time that the candy was made?
So
it's an abandoned factory.
So Moriarty took over the factory, poisoned all the candy, then shut the factory down and left the candy there?
Yeah, the answer is don't think about it. Because the show doesn't care. The show does not care. It's like, I don't know, man, poison candy wrappers or whatever. It's easy to poison the fucking candy, I would think.
And the reason I want to think about it is because Moriarty is just off his rocker, especially in that video that you were talking about, and I'm picturing him on the floor just rocking back and forth, unwrapping the pieces of candy and painting them with a little paintbrush with the mercury, and he's like, yes, my Sherlock, we will get you.
Oh my god, just full Joker vibe. Yeah. You want to see how I got these rappers? It's like, okay, all right, Jesus Christ. Yep, doesn't make sense. Doesn't need to make sense. Villain magic is the answer. It's going to become a real consistent theme later. It's just villains can do magical stuff because they're evil and smart. Yay, I'm really excited for next season and not dreading it at all. Okay, we have to take a break. And then when we come back, we will be talking about the kind of climax of this episode. And then we're going to get into some deep historical contextualization, I guess, of the way that the end of this episode and the 2-year hiatus changes what Sherlock fandom looks like in a real fundamental way. And perhaps we will start to see the seeds of the conspiracy theory begin to like hatch, or at least at a cultural level, we begin to see why maybe this stuff starts happening, and we're going to really start to get some firm answers in the community of why is it that people take this show that at this point you and I both acknowledge like they're just making stuff up and not being interested in detail. Why is there still this huge component of people trying to puzzle it all out and find out the truth? And so we'll definitely get into that. We'll start to see the beginnings of that at the end of this episode. So we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Give Up After 3 is a production of Zero Indent. If you like the kind of content we make, you can find more at zeroindent.com. Or if you'd like to support us and get all of the episodes of this season right now when you're listening to it, you can head to patreon.com/zeroindent. Even a few dollars a month helps us out. We know this content isn't for everybody. It's a very specific kind of media criticism. So if you do enjoy it, consider supporting us and maybe tell a friend who you think might enjoy the show. And if not, enjoy the rest of this episode. So hungry, I'm just eating like a handful of cherry tomatoes. Like a psychopath.
I want to watch Lord of the Rings so badly now, because that is the only time in my life I have ever heard someone pronounce it tomatoes, aside from Samwise Gamgee. So I have this huge like burst of nostalgia right now.
Oh yeah, I forget that you guys say everything wrong.
Yeah, we say things wrong, we eat things wrong, we drive things wrong, everything is just wrong in America.
Yeah, it's not good. It feels like it's getting worse as well. Like it's just a slow slip into the apocalypse.
Yeah, you got room for a couch over there?
Yeah, that's it. Listen, I got the shades is about to arrive. You can stretch out, you know. It's the end of the fucking world. It's fine. All right. So our episode continues. Sherlock and Watson are on the run as professional assassins fight over access to the computer codes. The duo break into the house of a journalist poised to publish an expose on Sherlock. There, they discover Moriarty has developed a fake identity, Richard Brooke, who is supposedly an actor that Sherlock paid to pretend to be a criminal mastermind. So, like we were saying before, the twisting and untwisting kind of keeps going here. Moriarty being... So, I just want to acknowledge really quickly, Moriarty being an actor is like some next level, like Moffat-ism stuff. Like, this is a real Moffat moment. He has this knack for like... I don't know how he does it, but at a show-running level, he has this knack for these twists, which feel so impressive when they happen, where you're like, whoa, like, that's crazy. Obviously, the payoff is always the issue there, but at least textually, this feels like a really, like, a very distinct maneuver that could only happen in a Moffat-run TV show, I think.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that that is a strength he has, and it really comes to bear here.
Yeah, and the fact that he had literally done the work, because he had like published stuff, and she had pictures of that published stuff in the article. So he had put in the work and had gone out and done his children's shows and I think I said he was like an award winner or something. So he'd been doing it well for a certain period of time, which is just so weird to think about.
It's like we were saying before, it can be really hard to imagine characters with this kind of affectation, this kind of like this dramatic range of expression. It's hard to imagine them doing normal stuff. Like, it's very hard to imagine Moriarty sitting in makeup before filming his children's television show. Like, it just doesn't really like make sense to us with the way that he behaves, and that kind of clash of the affectation and I guess the narrative here. So that clashing of style, story, we're still starting to see that even on the bits that work. Like even this bit, which I think is really cool. It's like a really genius, like how do you even combat that? Like how do you change the story that is so convincing, right? The truth of people wanting to believe he's a fake, blended in with the fiction of this Richard Brooke character. Like it's an absolutely brilliant twist. But yeah, I guess like thematically it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It doesn't really have a lot to do with the thing this episode is about, which is Sherlock accepting that, like, you know, you can't open all the doors. Like there's just an extent to which like it's cool, but it's that cool that Moffat specializes in, I guess. I should say, because I didn't mention it before, basically the papers are getting ready to print this expose, which is basically Brooke saying Sherlock paid him and, you know, put him up to all of this stuff. That's going to happen the next morning. And so Sherlock basically has to decide what he wants to do about this problem. Do you have any other notes on, I guess, the sequence there in Kitty's house or on Brooke himself? Any thoughts here?
One thing that I really liked that I didn't really it didn't really register the first multiple times I had seen this was that we see that article, like not the one that's about to come out, but there was a teaser article that came out first. But like we see that at least with John, I think when he was talking with Mycroft, and then I want to say we might have seen it one more time, but the connection isn't made that Brooke is Moriarty. You just think that it's the crazy reporter who found a crazy person that is trying to pin something on Sherlock, and then it turns out that all of it is actually legit. So they planted those seeds earlier in the episode in a neat way that actually pays off. And it's not like normally when they plant the seeds, it turns out that it was a red herring and then the thing isn't actually real. But this time it was planting the seeds for something that was actually real. So it was they didn't do the stupid this time.
Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Because they're going to untwist this later, don't forget. Of course they do. Okay. Well, not only do they untwist this later, they retwist it as well. Jesus. Anyway. God, season 3 is a train wreck. Sorry, anything else on there, or should we talk about this next little confusing sequence and then the climax?
The only other note is I loved the acting, the way that they played that scene off, where Moriarty just is like acting terrified of Sherlock, and I wish that it had been more. That's the one thing, is that the whole thing was just played off for Kitty, and that was it. I
will say that the complete disbelief from John and Sherlock is so well done. And how quickly that becomes anger. I don't know.
I do wish, and I don't know if this is me just like inserting myself into John's role, which I so frequently find myself doing. I'm like, why isn't John doing this? Because he's smart enough to realize that Sherlock is doing this. And like in this instance, like this, because John's been around long enough and he's seen Moriarty do the evil stuff, so he's also smart enough to think this whole thing is a sham. So what is he, what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to get angry at Sherlock and disown him and leave him. That's what Moriarty wants. So he could have played into that. He could have made it look like he was abandoning Sherlock. He could have punched him in anger and then run out of the room. And Sean could have tricked Moriarty into thinking that his plan had worked. I don't know if all of that was too much for this story, because they obviously didn't go anywhere near this. They don't have John.
I think it probably. I think it would have that accidental consequence of they want, like, that would risk us not liking John, and the show is really careful about that in his character. Like, he has to be, we have to like him because we often don't like Sherlock, and so in risking his positioning, I think they worried that we would kind of be like, we disengage a little bit, would be my intuition if I was in that position.
Sherlock does this all the time, because like he does it just a few minutes later, where he makes John worried about Mrs. Hudson. He thinks that she's dying in the hospital and John's having a panic attack, and Sherlock is like, oh well, I don't care. It'd
Yeah,
been
but
the exact same thing, you know.
yes, but the difference is who's doing it, because John's supposed
Yeah.
to be our like self-insert or our point of view character, I guess.
And he's probably
Yeah,
like
I don't disagree.
he's the probably the like moral center from the audience's point of view too. So we're not supposed to see him do that stuff, even though it might be realistic. You don't normally
Yeah.
see him take the like the really highly intelligent action that is maybe more morally dubious, which is
Well, I guess,
kind
and he also can't be a doofus and make the wrong choice and accidentally play into, Sherlock's plan, or accidentally, take Moriarty's side, because again, like we have to like these characters. We have to like John, at least. So I think they're in this like between a rock and a hard place where they could have taken a risk and it would have really paid off, but the show is not necessarily in the business of that kind of risk. So, okay, anything else there, or should we talk about...
I don't know where they said this line, but I had it written here. I don't think it happened here, but at some point, somebody said the line of "You can't kill an idea," and I think that they've said that a couple different times, and I don't remember who said it when, but that's one of my favorite lines in like all of media.
Because I think the cabbie says it initially in the first episode when he's talking about the game he's playing. And then it comes up again. When does it come up again? It comes up again in Hounds of Baskerville, I think.
It's interesting they've woven that, and I don't know if we've really tracked it and talked about it, that it's been like constantly interwoven in all these different stories. But it's just such an interesting thing that that it's I don't know. There's so many different ways to interpret that line. It's just fascinating to me.
One of them directly plays into the conspiracy we're going to be looking at the very end. Like, one of them is like, you can't kill an idea, and people correlate that in a very, very specific kind of way to do with Moriarty and something that happens with him. And so this becomes one of the...
It's very much like V for Vendetta. Isn't that literally you can't kill a... Does he say you can't kill an idea?
It's something. It's not exactly that.
It's not exactly that, but it's so close. Yeah.
Because you know how like you got like the east wind is coming or whatever the freaking clue is, that like Moriarty's coming back and he never does. Anyway, it all plays into that. We'll dig into it later on.
Okay.
But yeah, again, like what I would say is that this show specializes in outputting lines of dialogue that would be great on a t-shirt. Like, it really is that aesthetic style. It's a very much the Whedon-esque, like really impressively delivered, cool sounding lines is definitely a strength of it. And as we keep saying, there is in doing so, obviously there is a trade-off. So I'm going to try and explain this next sequence here. It's a bit confusing because people go back and forth, so I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. I want to be also explicit. It's kind of not important where each character is at each particular time. It's more important just like where we end up at the end, as far as like the geography of our players. So I'll kind of skim through the details. But so leaving John, Sherlock contacts Molly at St. Bart's, and responding to a conversation earlier that they had, the one that we doted upon, he admits that he needs her help. Meanwhile, John goes to Mycroft's office to question him and learns that Mycroft divulged Sherlock's personal information during interrogations of Moriarty, given this was the only thing that allowed Mycroft to get any information about Moriarty. So, then I'm going to try and explain what happens next before we get to the hospital roof. Basically, John is on his way back from Mycroft's, and the way that this happens, because you alluded to this before, is John comes to St. Bart's, Sherlock stages Mrs. Hudson being shot, John goes back to 221B Baker Street, and then comes back to St. Bart's. It's a little convoluted, but that's essentially what happens. The positioning here is that Sherlock is trying to get John to leave and then come back at a time when he can see the confrontation on the roof and bear witness to what's going to occur. So... the only notes I had on these little sequences here before we get to the roof and this whole setup is I think I'm just like parasocially in love with Molly. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just love seeing her on screen. She's so great. It's such a good humanizing moment for Sherlock to be like, you know, to really admit that he's internalized what she said, which I really enjoy. Do you have anything on the hospital scene with Molly or Mycroft and Watson?
This was actually prior to that, in the scene where he figures out that their flat was bugged and there were cameras and stuff. And this is totally a CinemaSins thing, but he goes and opens up the laptop and he pulls up all of the Wi-Fi routers that are in the local vicinity, and he points to two of them that have strong signals and says, "Look, they're homing in on us. Look."
What does that mean? Huh?
Like, I could pull up now and I could show you my closest neighbors. Their strongest Wi-Fi is because they're closest. The ones further away, you can still see their Wi-Fi, but it's not as strong because they're further away. How does that show anything? I'm
very unclear on what it means at all. Like what it's trying. Like I don't just know what it's trying to say.
This is 3 times this episode that I've gotten like irate over some stupid little thing, and I don't understand.
I think if I had to speculate, I think it's because we are starting to see the edges of this thing more and more, and it's starting to feel more and more artificial in its construction. Because it's getting lazier and lazier. Like all the stuff that you talked about liking in season 1 and the start of season 2 is starting to just go away. Like all of the stuff that you described in the previous episode, where you were like, "Oh, I really like the way that they handle, the sound effects are really well placed," or "I enjoy the way that the tone is really well reflected by the camera work." This stuff just starts to fade away entirely. The editing is still good, and the cinematography is still good, but a lot of the things that you're enjoying are just like slowly getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and it's becoming so much more character driven, where it's all about the character of outlandish Moriarty versus intellectual Holmes with the steadfast Watson. Yeah. Like that is completely, it's so little detective work in here whatsoever. It's the dramedy now, or whatever you want to classify it.
And when we talked in the first episode about the idea of genre, and like whether or not we were coming to the show for the same things, and I kind of countered your suggestion of like, oh, well, like I want to watch a super smart guy to do super smart stuff. My counter at the time was, yeah, but that still has to be enjoyable to watch. And we're getting into the territory where it's becoming increasingly uninteresting to watch him do this smart stuff. At least in my opinion. I'm certainly starting to feel the show push back against me a bit more in that, like you said, they full on lie about the computer program just to get a gotcha on the audience. Like it's starting to feel a bit like we're the butt of some of these jokes, in a way.
Although it's interesting because you keep saying that the writers want to think you're an idiot if you believe this stuff, and to like some extent, like that's so true, because they're writing these shows for people who are not thinking at a level where they will see this stuff. So they're literally writing the shows for idiots, but making it look like they're writing it for smart people.
Yeah, well, because it makes it. Yeah, yes. That's literally what's happening. And next episode, they are going to literally, procedurally and systematically make fun of people trying to work out their show. They're going to do that in the fucking text itself, and it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll get there. Well, we'll get there. I had some notes on the John and Mycroft scene. If you want to talk about that, or do you have some stuff on Molly?
I didn't have anything till I got back up to the roof there.
Okay. I like John being incredibly defensive of Sherlock, and the way that he kind of frames, the way that it frames Mycroft. It's sort of like this whole sequence with Mycroft is proof that Mycroft might be smarter, I guess. I don't know what other word to use, but that Sherlock has like a better sense for reality and practicality. Like he understands how to implement his intelligence better. This kind of mistake of giving information to Moriarty about, someone in order to, like, this exchange is not a mistake that Sherlock would make, but it is a mistake Mycroft would make, even though Mycroft is way smarter. And so I just think that's a cool, like, little juxtaposition of like, well, like, where are their strengths as intelligent people? Like, what are these two people good at? Sherlock is good at these deductions, and then Mycroft is much better at this higher level, kind of strategic and operational, whereas Sherlock is far more excellent at the procedural.
And I think practically they didn't do a great job of showing why that was so important. Like the 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 dialogue said, people will believe the lie because you told them all these truths, and they took those truths and wrapped them around the lie. But we don't see what they're talking about. I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, we're just supposed to infer that within that article that Kitty wrote, that they go through Sherlock's whole life story, and Moriarty wove in bits about himself throughout there. But we don't see it, so we're just supposed to infer that Mycroft made this huge mistake, and we're supposed to feel bad about it for him, but we don't see why we're supposed to feel bad about it for him.
Yep. Oh, 100%. Well, because the important thing is not the why and the experience of it, it's the what, it's the output, which is people are going to think Sherlock is a fake. That's the important thing here. It's less important how we get there, it's more important that we get there.
And by the way, I had no clue where to talk about it. That may be my biggest problem with this entire episode, is why is that Moriarty's goal? I don't understand what he wants to achieve with this.
He's crazy. He's crazy, Darth. He's crazy.
Yeah.
He's crazy.
And that totally ties into his ending at the very end of it, is like his entire...
Why? What do you mean?
The entire
what do you
point
mean?
Of his character is supposed to be that he is building his evil empire that he will be in charge of, and Sherlock is getting in the way of his goals. So
yes.
Any normal villain would kill the person, but he's like, no, I can't kill him. I have to discredit him. Why? For the life of me, I don't understand how that helps build his empire, to discredit someone instead of just taking them out of the picture completely. And then Moriarty goes and gives up his whole empire in the first place, like, to end the episode. So
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it does not. Like, he's crazy, he's smart, and he's gay, and those things come together in this scene on the rooftop in a way that is insane. Like, it is properly buck wild. The way that the writers talk about it, by the way, is they're like, he's he's a genius and he's proper crazy. It's like, you can't have both in this context. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, I should set up the roof sequence in a second. We'll talk about Moriarty's plan and potentially Darth. What all really happened, and how did Sherlock survive? So Sherlock texts Moriarty, who meets him on the roof of the hospital. Sherlock claims he can erase Richard Brooke electronically with the computer code because Sherlock has deduced that it was in the rhythm that Moriarty was tapping. Something else to note here is that when Sherlock goes up to the roof, Moriarty is playing Staying Alive, which I love. Like, what an absolute goober he is. It's great. Okay, so do you want me to set up the whole scene until the climax, and then we can work through it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Moriarty reveals that there is no code, as the tapping is really a Bach tune that Sherlock must commit suicide to complete his plan. Ready to do so, since otherwise Moriarty's assassins will kill John, Mrs. Hudson, and Lestrade, Sherlock realizes that Moriarty has some sort of failsafe and can call the killings off. Sherlock then convinces Moriarty that he would be willing to do anything to make him activate the failsafe. So they're kind of at this standoff. We'll talk about the climax in a second here, but I want to work through this little bit of television here. So one of the revelations we get is that Richard Brooke is so this is like the Moffat school of cleverness once again. If I had to identify a Moffat moment, clever, cool guy thing to do, it's that Richard Brooke is like Rich Brooke, which in German is Reichenbach, which is the case that made Sherlock's name. And after the Rach thing in the first episode, it's one of those things where, like, I guess you could work this out yourself, but it adds literally nothing. It's just Moriarty being cool and clever. Like, it doesn't serve anything. What are your thoughts here about this kind of setup as they go back and forth? Where's your head at with this stuff?
Just to really briefly touch on the naming thing, having a unique source of a name doesn't necessarily mean that it needs that information doesn't need to really play into everything else. It doesn't have to be some huge revelation, I don't think. Like some of the names that Lucas chose for some of his Star Wars characters have some interesting insights to what he wanted that character to be. So the name means XYZ in a different language, but that doesn't recontextualize the character for you. It's just a cool little bit of backstory. So knowing that
well, it's not backstory though. It's extra text, like because like German doesn't exist in Star Wars, so Vader doesn't mean father in Star Wars. Vader is just a word Vader, right?
Yeah.
Like it's extra textual information that adds flavor, but it's not. So you're not supposed to literally be like, Sidious called him Darth Father. It's like, we know that Vader means father, and it's a cool sounding evil name, and he was given that name because of the context under which he became a Sith. Like,
yeah, but like
it's extra textual.
The comparison here is I don't think the audience was supposed to think, oh, Richard Brooke, might that be German for Reichenbach? Like, I don't think we were supposed to I don't think that was supposed to be part of a solve. I think that was just supposed to be, oh, that's a neat little tidbit that they threw in there, that Moriarty did this and Sherlock didn't catch it until now. You know, I think it was just kind of supposed to be that quick. But really the only point that I had in this scene was that I loved one piece of dialogue, and the way that it was acted, which was Sherlock looking at him in shock and saying, "You're insane," and Moriarty goes, "You're just getting that now?"
Yeah. I like that.
I love the way that was played, and I swear that I've said that like 3 times last week, just in my normal day-to-day.
Just in preparation, just really vibing it. Yeah, the dialogue here is great. I like watching them go back and forth. Again, the acting in this show is never the problem. I really like the line of dialogue, which is Moriarty says, "That's your weakness. You always want everything to be clever." So good. Like, what a great ironic line of dialogue.
That's what I was about to say.
Oh, it's so good. This is like next level. Like, this hits on so many levels. Obviously, it's related to Sherlock's fear of not knowing, which we talked about in the previous episode, where he's got this anxiety if he is unable to solve something. But also directly relates back to my earlier thought about like the idea of the door, right? Which is that Sherlock has to realize he can't open all doors. Not all problems have solutions. Sometimes the most elemental explanation is true. Like Occam's razor, right? Like sometimes the simplest explanation is the truth. And Moriarty saying that's your weakness, you always want everything to be clever, is so good because he thinks Sherlock hasn't solved it. And he thinks that Sherlock isn't smart enough to solve it. But the simple truth is that Sherlock has solved his riddle and his final problem and is going to outplay him. It's so good. This is like such a good line of dialogue, and it's delivered so well.
I thought the reason you loved it so much was because it seems like it's a blatant call out from the writers to the writers, where they're saying,
it's that too, yeah.
But
it's that too.
I don't know if they did it intentionally or not, but
yeah, it certainly feels that way. I should say, so basically, I know I mentioned this, but I just want to make it explicit. So the gambit here is that Moriarty is trying to get Sherlock to complete the narrative, which is that like this disgraced detective who was a fake kills himself, so he has to jump off the rooftop. And if Moriarty's men don't see Sherlock jump, then they'll kill Sherlock's friends. So, do you have anything else on the conversation, or should we talk about the penultimate moment here?
The only other thing I could think of is totally a CinemaSins thing. I understand why they did what they did, but the setup only works if the snipers are in the exact right position. The one that's with Mrs. Hudson is fine. The carpenter is helping her with stuff. He has a pistol. He's literally right there with her. But the sniper is watching John while the sniper is up in like the second floor inside, he's inside the stairwell of a building. John just went back to 221B and then now is coming back to St. Bart's. So how does the sniper know to be up there in this window, at that exact window? What if John walked to the other side of the building or something? Like, and then the same thing with, I don't think we ever see Lestrade and who is threatening him, but it's kind of the same question as it going all the way back to that episode in the pool where the snipers don't necessarily, you don't need to show them literally there with the sniper dot on the people to say, if you don't jump, we will kill your friends. Like, the threat is enough. You don't really need to show it. I understand why they showed it. It just came off as kind of cliched. Just, this guy in a random stairwell, and he's gonna kill John.
Yep. Yeah, it's just one of those, like, it's television, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, so sorry, one thing just before I talk about the ending here. On that line that I mentioned before, that's your weakness, you always want everything to be clever, is also double ironic because Moriarty's targeting the three people who are like Sherlock's friends that matter, but it's the normal person, Molly, who is unimportant, who is not clever, who is, the weakness that Moriarty has, right? Moriarty fails to value the ordinary in a moment where Sherlock chooses to, and that's what Sherlock is gambling on.
And it is so extra bizarre because he dated her for 3 weeks.
It's so confusing.
Like, he had to have seen some flashes of insight from her that would have made him see that she has some potential there. Maybe.
I don't know. And we obviously get a lot more Molly next season, and I'm here for all of it. But yeah, it's just one of these like weird oversights. But I mean, that's Moriarty's weakness, right? Is that he is so fucking smart that he doesn't think of the simple stuff. It's they are reflections of each other in that way. So to make it explicit, we've talked around it. So realizing that Sherlock will do anything to convince him to use the failsafe, realizing that they are very, very, like, not only that they are similar, but that Sherlock is the same kind of twisted, Moriarty kills himself by putting a gun in his mouth and pulling the trigger. This essentially gives Sherlock no way to call off the snipers, so he has to jump.
And that line is another great line that should be on a t-shirt. You're on the side of the angels. I may be on the side of the angels, but don't think for a second that I am one of them.
Yeah, that's definitely on a t-shirt. Yeah, for sure. Like, definitely on a t-shirt.
It's
for sure.
It's an amazing line. I love it.
Yeah.
It's also very cliche, and I cringe a little.
It's the style of this show at its peak, where it's like, Jesus Christ, like, it's pure melodrama. You've already touched on it, but Moriarty killing himself here makes absolutely no sense. It's a huge twist, and it's like, again, it's just like this twist and untwist. But it's just like really dumb, and it's a really dumb waste of this villain. And they don't do anything with this twist ever. They tease this twist for literally every season finale till the show ends. Up to the point where at the end of the final episode, they tease it again. But he never comes back, and he just dies here. And that's the whole use of this, is just this dramatic twist. So with no way to use the failsafe, Sherlock calls John, who is rushing back from 221B after having found the report of Mrs. Hudson's shooting false. Claiming he was always a fake and explaining that this last phone call is his note, Sherlock throws himself from the roof of St. Bartholomew's as John looks on from the street. After being knocked to the ground by a cyclist, John watches as Sherlock's crumpled and bloody body is carried away by hospital staff. I gotta be honest, the acting in this scene is absolutely phenomenal. Sherlock and John talking on the phone, looking at each other from afar. Sherlock, actually crying and suddenly realizing what he's about to do to his friend. Put him through this trauma to sell the lie is brilliant. And I get a bit emotional every time. Like, Martin Freeman acts this so well. There's this like frantic, just sheer helpless panic that he has.
And part of that is
such a good scene.
Part of that is because of that opening scene, which is one of the defenses I could have for them keeping that scene in there, is that we saw how distraught he was at the beginning, and his voice kept breaking, and he couldn't even get out the words, "My friend Sherlock is dead." And now we're seeing, this is when Sherlock dies, and so we're, at some level, we're going back and thinking about that opening scene, and thinking, we're about to catch up to how heartbroken he is. So yeah, beautifully acted.
Absolutely cracking scene. Yeah.
And I mean, Moriarty, 2 thumbs up. His death throws were just fantastic.
Brilliant, just brilliant. Do you have any notes on? So we'll talk about the fall in some extended detail in a minute when we get into some of the theory crafting and the metatextual historical contextualization. But I guess at a text level, is there anything else you want to talk about with this moment before we kind of pivot into talking about the text at large and the community?
There's no way to talk about the notes I have without giving away the fact that it was all fake. So
Okay.
let's just get that cat out of the bag.
Let's just get that out of the way. Okay. So the episode returns to Watson meeting up with his therapist, but he is unable to open up still. Later, he visits Sherlock's grave with Mrs. Hudson. While standing in front of the gravestone, he reaffirms his faith in Sherlock and begs him not to be dead. From the shadows, Sherlock looks on silently as John walks away. Credits. I've spent the better part of 10 years wondering why to God they choose to show Sherlock here. I think I have an explanation, which I'll get to in a minute, but that's the setup for how this ends. Sherlock is alive and his suicide was a fake.
Well, I think I could answer that question like immediately, because the showrunners did not want the show to die, and the interest in the show would have died if they didn't give an indication, a strong indication, that he was alive.
Yep.
Personally, what I would have loved is I don't think we ever see in this series. Sherlock was supposed to be very good with disguises. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
And I think this would have been the absolute perfect opportunity, that he is like a grizzled, hunched over old man, and he even talks to John. And then after John leaves, this old man looks right up directly into the camera, and we see those piercing eyes, which everyone instantly recognizes as Sherlock's, and that's the cut. Mm-hmm. That would have been a whole lot better than him just standing out in the middle of the graveyard where anyone could see him and be like, "You're not dead." Yeah. And it would have been so much less on the nose. I don't know.
Yeah, to your point, actually, I completely agree with you around why they show it. They have to, there's two things happening here, which is that Sherlock sacrificing himself and the idea of himself for his friends is like a genuinely fitting conclusion to this character arc. After learning to trust others and how to be a friend, he makes the ultimate sacrifice for his friends. Moriarty's no longer a threat, and he's come to become the person he was always supposed to be. He can rest easy knowing his friends are safe from Moriarty. And I think, I think it was either a mandate from the BBC, or it reveals a huge level of insecurity from the showrunners about the reason people are interested in this TV show.
So the two notes that I had about the actual death scene were, the first one was that the filmmakers used another of those cheap tricks that I'm always talking about, where they just blatantly lie to the audience, and it was that you see undeniably his body hit the ground. Mm-hmm. They show it undeniably. So for the actual solve, if I remember right, which is hard to remember because they did so many freaking fake outs on the audience for which one was true, but that was completely fictitious. That clip of the body hitting the ground, it did not happen. So they only put that in there to fool us.
Just to be really clear, there is no in-universe explanation for how this happened. All of the explanations you get are fake. We get a real one, but then later on Sherlock's like, no, obviously that was a lie. Oh, so just to be really, really clear, we never textually find out how this happened. The
one that he says is a lie, I will go down fighting that is the real one, because that is the one that makes so much practical sense. But regardless, and one reason that I say that is because I love how that ties in with the note that I had, that the entire time he's on the phone with John, he gives multiple hints of what's about to happen. And the video that you sent me, that was like this little secret thing they did that I didn't know about, where it's like a videotape from Sherlock after he's dead. And there's hints in that as well. But he says, it's all in this. He says, it's all a magic trick. Keep your eyes fixed on me. Like, there's so much subtext to that right there. It's like, don't see. And like what we were alluding to is one of those things, one of the explanations was that they rolled out a big air mattress for him to land on, so he didn't die when he hit the concrete, and that's why John had to keep focused on him. That's why the cyclist had to hit John. All of that stuff had to play out perfectly, and he's telling John what is happening so John won't spend the next 2 years completely distraught. But John's a thick-headed numbskull, so he doesn't get all the little hints. Even in the videotape, when Sherlock is directly talking to him and saying, "Hey, I'm not dead," John still doesn't get it.
Yeah, we should let's put a pin in the subtext thought because I have a lot of notes about that in a minute. But yeah, we'll talk about with the subtext in a bit more detail. But what was the other note that you had?
That is everything that I had. The rest of the time I yield.
Okay, so let's talk about how Sherlock survived, first of all. And then I want to talk to you about the impact that this season finale had on the discourse around the show. Something to note historically is there is a 2-year gap between this episode and the next season. So previously it had been a year gap. Now it becomes 2 years for this instance. I believe it's because Cumberbatch was on Star Trek or something like that. Like there was something else happening.
I thought it was always a long time because that was a meme in the fandom. Yeah. Even when I got into it, was that you have to wait 10 years between each episode or something like that.
Yeah. So I want to read you the most popular and simplest theory of how Sherlock survived. This is from a Tumblr blog called Sherlock Inquisition, and this post is from 2013. So I'm going to read this for you verbatim, but I'm going to abridge it as I go, just for time's sake. So before the roof scene, Sherlock is shown with a large bouncy ball. If you put a ball like this under your arm and squeeze down, it cuts off your radial pulse enough that you can't feel it. This is a common magician's trick. After this, he's seen asking Molly for a favor, which seems to have been blood for the morgue and a death certificate. Sherlock calls John and guides him to stand in a very specific spot and tells him to stop there. A couple minutes later, when John moves forward, Sherlock tells him, "Stay exactly where you are, don't move." This keeps a short building between them, making it possible for John to see anything that's being set up below. Now, there's a picture here of the laundry truck. Do you have access to the dock in front of you? If you go to page 88, just while I'm doing this, there's some images that I think will be helpful for reference that I'll put up on the screen. Sherlock jumps off the roof, landing on the setup behind the laundry truck, which blocks the sniper's view of where Sherlock fell. We'll look at these images in a sec together. So if you go, it's like the top of page 87 rather. So let me know when you're there.
There's only 152 pages, so it doesn't take long for this to load at all.
Yeah, for the humble listener, I take a lot of notes.
Yeah. Okay. The one picture. There's actually a little green screen truck thing.
Yeah, so I'll try and describe what we're looking at. So the first image is a picture of a laundry hamper on the back of a truck. And then on the right, you have the building that's blocking John's view. So then we have an image below it where you have two kind of lines. You have a blue line and a red line, both going down to the laundry truck. Both of those. So the laundry truck is behind two buses and behind that small brick building to the left. So the red line is where Sherlock fell. The blue line is where John stood when the sniper had him in his sights. The green is like roughly where the truck was when he fell. So we're kind of like, the sniper was somewhere up to the left of the camera view. So by the time John reaches the body, Sherlock is surrounded by medics and he has the ball under his arm. This lets John check his radial pulse at the wrist and pull him away before he can check his carotid pulse on his neck, which would be unaffected by the ball. It seems impossible to tell what he landed on, but it's quite possible he landed on a waiting laundry car. This would easily hide the truck. This could easily hide behind the truck and would provide approximately 3 feet of cushion. Additionally, it would be easy enough to hide a bag of blood in the cart. So we'll talk about who was in on it in a second, but this kind of like, it's hard to explain, but they've put like Photoshop overlays on this image. This kind of practice becomes really common. So people begin to actually do this. They start to really think about this stuff seriously. We saw in that example before about the IOU. People are doing real life research to try and work this stuff out. So just to cap off this explanation, who was in on it? Molly. She gave Sherlock the blood and faked his death certificate. The bicyclist, which is a hard word to say, the cyclist. He gave Sherlock extra time to get into position with the fake blood and made a large scene out of it. And then, of course, the medic team. The fact they let John feel his radial pulse, but not his carotid pulse. Carotid. Is that right? Carotid.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Much closer than what I said.
Additionally, a real medic team would be sure to do a thorough examination, not that they just like bustle him away. So this is like a pretty reasonable explanation. It's that he landed on something that we can't see that's out of frame, obscured and occluded by the buses in the truck. But I guess what I'm trying to illustrate here is that, this happened, this post comes out, in the years in between, and there are like dozens and dozens of these where people are trying to explain how Sherlock faked it. Which means we kind of have to talk about the impact that this unexplained moment has on the discourse and the 2-year time frame. So instead of the audience focusing on the emotional impact and resonance of this moment, because we see Sherlock survive, the focus becomes entirely on how he survived. So instead of us going, oh, like, look at how much Sherlock has changed and grown and look at this big sacrifice he's made, Tumblr just kind of like loses their mind trying to explain this from all of the textual clues in the show. Now, as you and I have readily identified, because of the nature of the show, you don't have all the clues. They've fabricated some information. They've lied to you about other stuff. Like, you and I have already identified this is a fruitless exercise. The show is not interested in giving you this information. It's hard to understate the impact this finale had on the material nature of fan discourse. The internet has a lot of time to itself to think about this show. I guess to understand how the shift is taking place, I want to bring you to another Tumblr post, which is from a blog that I've been reading historically. So I'm actually following along with their posts as we're going through our episodes. So this one comes from Loudest Subtext in Television. And I want to read this as an explanation and a illustration of the framework that these fans start to develop. So they kind of unintentionally begin to craft a framework for understanding text. So Anonymous asks, I see you're quite good at catching subliminal messages, especially in Sherlock. So I wanted to ask what you look for or look at when watching a series or maybe reading a book. Things like paying attention to colors, setting, or anything like that could have a deeper meaning, So this is the question. It's like, how do you read subtext and subliminal messaging? So I'll try and summarize because this is a really long text, and I'll bring in some pull quotes. But to begin with, Loudest Subtext defines how they notice subtext. And I'm going to directly quote this. Quote, things left intentionally ambiguous, especially if they could have easily had a resolution. The fact that these things are ambiguous means they're going to do something with them, probably something surprising. End quote. Do you agree with that as a definition, I guess, of like subtext? Ambiguous things could have been resolved, they probably will be surprising or something like that. Does that sound aligned with like the way that, you as a normal reader think about what subtext is?
I want to say that there could be a lot of different definitions for subtext because it could mean different things to different people and different things given different situations. And then you get into the difference in subliminal versus superliminal. So I guess it's really hard to agree or disagree with that particular definition. For my money, it's a really interesting way of approaching this question. Because I agree with almost all of it. My issue is really the last part. So the last part is, quote, the fact that these things are ambiguous means they're going to do something with them, probably something surprising, end quote. So it's this idea that subtext as a function of text, like it's this proposal that it only exists to go somewhere. Now, at a very basic definition, just so that we've got our literary terms straight, for those who haven't done a thesis in creative writing, subtext provides not explicitly stated information to the reader, either about the story, the characters, or often like the story's metatext, right? The world building or something like that. Subtext is not purely a vehicle to, it's not just setting up and paying off things. It can do other stuff. Probably more commonly when we discuss subtext these days, it's either related to something like world building, as I said, or usually in the psychoanalytical framework, which is to say we would talk about the subtext in relation to a character's emotional state, maybe their desires or needs, or like some underlying aspect of their interiority that we're not given, we're not told about, we're not privileged information. We might read the way that Benedict Cumberbatch looks into the middle distance when thinking about John Watson and interpret his mental state, right? That is subtext that's happening. The type of subtext referred to by Loudest Subtext, which is very confusing because it's the name of the Tumblr blog, is revelation subtext. So revelation subtext is essentially the function of giving a bunch of clues that build up towards some grander understanding of the story, usually revealed at some key pivotal moment in the narrative.
What's really important to note here is that in being subtext, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't also be explicit at certain points. The most obvious piece of subtext, if you would like to call it that, is the reveal of Vader as Luke's father. This is revelatory subtext. There are little clues that you can pick up on, but it's less interested in that. It's more about the operatic reveal, right? Other types of subtext, which you kind of hit on, which is like this idea that it's not just one thing. There's subtext via query, which is where things are left deliberately vague for some formal effect. This is what this is what, in my opinion, we see the most in television these days, particularly in the era of prestige TV, where a character might conduct an action that alludes to their greater state of mind, but we never get the privileged information about how they think or feel. Think about the entirety of Mad Men. That whole show is subtext via query for the most part, where you never get told like how Don Draper thinks or feels about something, but you get to watch him take action and try and interpret his interiority from that action. So a few key concepts there. The one that they're talking about is revelation subtext. So does that make sense so far, I guess, as to try and delineate these different methods?
Yeah, and I was kind of trying to think of other examples, and I wonder if that's playing like so much into how audiences are supposed to interpret film now, because like there's so much stuff in the Star Wars sequel trilogy that doesn't make sense, but people interpret what they consider the subtext to be so that everything does make sense. And I wonder if that mentality is all kind of coming out of stuff like Sherlock here, where everyone is just spending so much time poring over what they think the subtext of all of these scenes are, and it's just allowed writers to get to a point where they know they don't have to put work in because everyone's going to read all this extra meaning into their stuff forever.
Yeah, I mean, you basically hit on like the thesis of this book that I'm writing, like based on this, right? Which is like in the act of this mode of engagement, it lets writers be lazy in a way that is really compelling and interesting, and really it fails. It's readers failing to understand the role of an author in text, and it's readers failing to understand, as I've said before, text is created object. I want to give you some more examples of the way that this comes through in Sherlock, and then we'll talk a little bit about where this ends up going. So some more examples of subtext from Sherlock, for example. This is the same post, same response. Quote, Irene Adler, whether Sherlock is straight or not, whether he can feel sexual attraction or not. You don't make Sherlock sexually ambiguous, but maybe hetero, if you're going to call it back later and be like, yeah, he was hetero all along. You don't build up people for an unsurprising surprise. End quote. This is the idea that like you don't fudge around with his sexuality and then later on just be like, nah, he was straight the whole time. Now, you and I can pretty readily observe the text does this, they do this because they genuinely think the idea that, like, Watson and Sherlock being gay is funny. Or they think that hinting at the relationship is funny. Or they think that misleading the audience is funny. And so this ontology claim, this truth claim of you don't build up people for an unsurprising surprise, is just like, it's a failure to understand the role of author in text. They're just creating a text that they think is good, and these people are going, well, no, obviously, like, they wouldn't be lazy like that just to, like, untwist that twist, because that would be, like, really dumb and bad, and they wouldn't be bad on purpose. And it's like, no, like, Gaddis and Moffat are trying to make a good show and failing. Like, it's this really interesting, I'll try and fold it all together in a second. Another example, quote, when a character changes his behavior or acts out of character, why does John get so handsy with Sherlock when he's drunk, but yells about not being gay when he's sober? Quote. And my all-time favorite piece of evidence, which is like, this is a real, like, if this happens, you know that it's subtext, which is, quote, things that seem extraneous to the literal narrative. Things that seem extraneous to the literal narrative, quote. So this is scenes that you and I have identified where we're like, well, that was a waste of time. We need not have had that scene. And there's a lot of them in this show. And this framework that they're creating, where they are taking these different aspects of the text and theory crafting, is essentially this exercise of developing a framework to unify what is in the text and the text's mistakes or the text's laziness. So it is an effort to find a way to universally take anything in and without the text, so within and without, both you know, kind of inside the text itself and your paratext and your extra text, and sort of unify it into one cohesive, simple explanation. You know, if you put all of the pieces together, obviously John and Watson are gay. Or actually, you know, John and such, or Sherlock and such. You know, it's this effort to try and take the complexity of this textual object where there are different forces moving in and out of it, right? It's trying to take that and then create a simple view of it where everything fits together. Something that's probably worth noting too, which I think is really interesting, is some sources, like certain blogs, treat it as like authentic. They're kind of like an authentic like source for this versus other blogs, which are sort of more, they're treated like as far more kind of conspiratorial. And so something to note, I guess, is when he fakes his death, it gets subjected to this exact framework where readers are taking this incorrect framework of text and placing it on top of this new maneuver by the text, which in this case, like the new maneuver is giving you this big dramatic finale and then like not explaining it. They are putting this model that they have been building on top of it and trying to unify all of the different aspects of the text, stuff that you and I have identified as errors or oversights or laziness or just straight up like gay jokes at the expense of the idea of queerness. And as they do this, they're getting further and further away from reality of the text, like we keep saying. But what's actually happening now is they have a formal apparatus to do that. And it's that usual thing of like if you say, oh no, well this part of the text disproves your theory, they will actually fold that into the proof of the theory because they've already got the outcome they want. In this way, it's very different. It's very sort of, it's not dissimilar to things like QAnon and flat earthers. And you even see some of the style of that come in here and kind of get born here, this radicalization where there's this tendency to like fire off questions in really succinct order, as if this proves like, as if you answered all these, you would just realize the truth. Like, I don't know if you've seen that on like Instagram or Twitter or things like that, with these QAnon, where they're like, what about this? And what about this? And this and this and this and this. And you're like, whoa. Like, you're just saying stuff. And if you went through and answered them procedurally, they wouldn't care. They would try and find a way to warp reality to suit whatever outcome they want. So I want to read you a quote of just something that sounds like somebody having a mental breakdown, like about this stuff. Quote, "Does it mean something that when Sherlock is asking women what they like best about the Mayfly men, John literally interrupts one of them mid-sentence? Did that sentence apply to him? Did all the traits listed or just that one? Does it mean something that when Sherlock asks them all if they have a secret they've never told anyone, John suddenly interrupts with, what do you mean? Is there a secret John might not have told anyone? Are there other clues in the episode for what such a secret might be?" End quote. And so you can feel the style of that constant question making of like, well, what about this? And like, what does this tell us? And what could this mean? And I think pretty categorically, the answer to a lot of these questions is like, the text isn't interested in what that means. It's either implying something about the emotional state of the characters or the world for the most part. But also, Sherlock is a text that's deeply dismissive of mystery solving. So it could also just be the writers making a mistake and not being interested in the subtle nuances. And so I think it's a real... those frameworks developing and being applied to this death becomes the mode of these communities moving forward. To the point where these users begin to create like intro to X, intro to this meta starter packs, where they actually give you like an onboarding series of tools and theories and frameworks to assist new readers in understanding the fundamentals for a particular meta or mode of user engagement. Like in the most literal sense, and I cannot stress this enough, these users are ignoring how the text is teaching them to read it and developing their own phenomenological frameworks for understanding the text, and then teaching other people those frameworks. It is deeply fascinating. Did you come across any of this kind of framework, or did you just kind of pat around the edges of it when this stuff was happening? Like, were you actively aware of this, or was it more like background radiation?
No, like I had said previously, I'm not really sure when I first got involved in the franchise, and when I was, it was just my brother and I and maybe one of our roommates who were watching it together, and I don't know that I ever talked about it with anyone else aside from them. I definitely was not reading the same kind of forums and stuff that you're talking about. Um, but it kind of just reminded me of what Rye was just talking about in our Kenobi episode when he brought up all of the different communities on Reddit who like only exist to bash Disney Star Wars, and then the other communities that only exist to bash them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Is there any legitimacy to us spending the time to analyze these groups when they are just fascinated on if they are fascinated on exploring John and Sherlock's relationship to the point where they will just recontextualize anything to prove that relationship, like at what point does analyzing that, does it just lead us back to the fact that they're going to always think that no matter what we say, no matter what proof, if Sherlock gets married to a woman, it doesn't matter. They're still going to go and they're going to find proof in the wedding ceremony. The way that he pronounced "I do" is going to say he meant John.
Yeah. Well, no, you're exactly right. And at what point should these people not be taken seriously about text? Is the other question. I think the other underlying question that you're hinting at, that I want to make more explicit, is something that you ask a lot in these episodes, which is, was that intentional or not? Like, did the writers mean to do that? And to hint at a broader theme of season 3, which is going to be a big part of our discussion, is this idea of death of the author. So Death of the Author is an essay by Roland Barthes, where Barthes kind of pushes back against this idea of authors having the final claim on their work's meaning. And instead, he kind of posits like, hey, each individual reader and their own interpretation of work should be preferenced over an author's. So like, for example, if I put a book out and I say it's actually about, the book is about these 5 things, but you read it and you go, well, actually, I think it's about these 3 other things. Barthes is sort of saying, hey, we should preference the userly engagement outcome of that.
I just thought of Tobias writing his book, The Man Inside Me.
Oh, no. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you're talking about, though.
Yes, it is. Yep. Fucking hell. God damn it. We can't. Oh, Jesus Christ. Anyway, Barthes argues that meaning is created at the time of reception, not creation. Something I've mentioned before that I completely agree with. This is the idea that, like, just because Moffat and Gaddis put something into a text, and they say that it means this, when you read it and the way that you interpret it, should be preferenced over how they are crafting it. Now, what the work of media analysis and literary criticism is to try and understand what are those intentionalities at the time of creation, what is the reception like, and how do those things change the way that we relate to text? How does it change the way that we think about and talk about text? Why is my reading mode so different of this TV show than the people who were doing this at the time on Tumblr? Like, what does that tell us about the way that art and meaning is made through these works? And what does it tell us about the creators making it? And, what does it tell us about the time the text was being made? And so I guess when informed of a lack of deliberateness for a text like we are here, we have to look at larger factors, right? So it's things like, was the choice due to some paratextual apparatus, which is to say, like, maybe an editor made this change, maybe a studio network requested a modification to a scene, maybe a location wasn't available on a particular day. Maybe it's a metatextual reason. The author's cultural biases influence their work. Their childhood influenced the way that they think about different things, the way they craft stereotype. Maybe we consciously choose to read a framework that's different to the author's style of writing. Like, maybe we conduct a queer reading or a postmodern reading. There are ways that we can choose to change our interpretation of text to understand how meaning might be made differently. But the one that the thing that I think we're going to get to, and the method for me is really paying off of reading these blogs, is there is a framework that these guys are applying, and I think we can identify and begin to develop that framework into something that is realized. Because I think that without realizing it, they are creating resources for newcomers and saying, hey, if you want to get into these metas, here's how you do it. Like that blog was saying before, how do you read subtext in TV shows? Here's my toolkit for doing so. They are creating these phenomenological frameworks in order to buoy their reading of the text and bring others into that framework. It's really no different, aside from, I guess, the lack of formal training and perhaps the kind of, like we keep saying, the ignorance of some of the ways text functions. It's really no different than, the things that you're saying, these subreddits where people have decided they're going to read it through a particular framework or lens, and so every reading has to come through that. Perhaps the difference here is the outcome, because the outcome is, as we're going to get to much later on, the outcome is a very kind of predestined failure of this framework, where it's proven to be incorrect, and the reality snaps back into focus, and these frameworks obviously prove to be ineffective at reading this text, and ineffective at I guess creating a community who's able to pass this text for what it is. I think that for me is why I'm interested in continuing to take them seriously, because people in those spaces took themselves seriously at the time. And in order to empathize with and understand, I guess, the goal of this show, I think it's really interesting to, while acknowledging that it's goofy and some of it's just like absolutely bonkers. Like, remember that smoking thing? Like, just some really crazy stuff. It is, for someone at a particular time in their life, was a tool for reading this text in a mode of user engagement that, like, for whatever reason, they needed at that time or felt the need to do at the time. And we might pass out a bit of what that means when we, talk about the wounded masculinity and that intelligence thing we mentioned. So I think it's all sort of interrelated. And for me, as I was saying, the method's really starting to pay off, and identifying in this 2-year gap that these frameworks begin to get a lot of cohesion. Because the other thing that's happening here is that there isn't new text to analyze. So they have a lot more time to actually hone in and finesse the existing theories and repass the existing text. And so they get much better at doing so before we get, the next season.
I don't know
yeah.
Like, after everything that you were just talking about, one of the things that just popped into my head was there are so many varied ways that audience members respond to the text, and some of them, like you've been talking about, are so fixated on proving one specific point. Like we've talked about in Star Wars, there are the people that are fixated on saying, this is bad. There are people that exactly opposite, that refuse to admit anything is bad, and they just love everything that comes out. There are people that will so strictly adhere to the text that is there that there's no room for argument with them. And then there's the vice versa. There's people that say, it didn't give me enough. There's not enough. It's not explicit enough. I don't like it anymore, so I'm leaving the fandom. And it was just really odd for me to realize, and I've kind of thought about it before, but just there's so many various ways that we respond, or that we interpret the message, and without a psychologist involved to really say, like, these are the types of personalities that will respond to text and interpret the text in a certain way. But that would be really interesting to try to figure out, is like, what is the AB personality type of the people that you're describing versus the people that, respond in XYZ. Because, like, I was thinking about it, like, there are so many of my favorite Star Wars scenes. It's my headcanon. I don't care that the text doesn't support it. It's how I'd like to interpret that scene, and it does not bother me whatsoever for me to know the text doesn't support my headcanon. That doesn't bother me. But to other people, it's like they literally will leave the Star Wars fandom because the text doesn't support their headcanon. So, like, what's the difference here? Where's the disconnect between me and this guy, and then someone else that's interpreting it completely differently? So
it's interesting. I mean, it comes back to something that's a really core concept. But you're right, which, I mean, like, social is founded on exclusion, right? So, like, the idea of your social engagement with the text of Star Wars is founded on exclusion. Exclusion just basically means, like, inclusivity is defined by exclusivity, which is to say, there are things in Star Wars that you like, where you are willing to include them, and then things that you dislike or that don't affect you, that you exclude. So in that context, the social you're excluding is like, you don't mind that the text maybe has a slightly different thing to say, whereas for someone else, they are unable to exclude that and so their social changes and they move into effectively different social. There is a more theoretical version of that, but that's, I guess, a concept. Where it's like, it's the tension with reality that we all experience, because none of us live in actual reality. We all live in our own different past versions of it. And I think you're right. I think it is a really interesting exercise to think about, well, for who does this stuff take them for a ride, and for who does it still have a hold on them? We talked about QAnon and we talked about flat earthers, and on face, those things seem absolutely absurd, but there is a mechanism that this part of the internet kind of started, of radicalization. And again, I want to use radicalization. Like any literary term, it's neither inherently positive nor negative. That they are radicalized in these directions to treat reality in a type of way. And what is it about the internet specifically that has this ability to do it? Like, why is it so easy for people to drift like this? And who are the people that are susceptible to it? And how do we give them or encourage and empathize with and develop tools that help them, inoculate themselves from, I guess, the charlatans that would take them for a ride? Ultimately someone is profiting from this stuff or benefiting from this stuff. And it's worthy of asking who is benefiting and why. It's just a really complicated thing. But you've exactly hit the nail on the head that I'm interested in exploring. I'm not a psychologist, so like my psychoanalytical readings are pretty sparse. I only really read stuff through frameworks in contemporary literary theory, but we will get to some of that as well. And probably we'll bring in some Robert Evans and his recent books on internet radicalization. He studied a lot of how does the internet radicalize people into terrorists and things like that, and we might see some of those frameworks are beneficial in understanding the pipeline to these communities. But yeah, it's a really interesting exercise still for me to periodically stumble on blogs that just like, I don't know how else to explain it, Darth. Like, they make no sense. Like, it really reads like that you have to have accepted so much other stuff to be true in order to even understand what they're talking about. Like, it's a different language. I've included less of those because I don't understand them. And like, I've been thinking about this stuff nonstop for like 3 months. Like it is just so hard to get to that level. It's all really interesting and complicated, and I'm very excited to keep kind of moving into it. So, any other thoughts here before we wrap up season 2?
Are we at the halfway mark for this series?
Almost. So season 3, episode 2 is the halfway mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Halfway to glory.
Because there's that post season 3 special. That's all. Have you seen that?
The Abominable Bride.
Yeah, because I haven't seen that. So I'm gonna be going into that fresh.
I thought you said we weren't gonna cover it because you hated it so much.
Well, I hated the idea of it so much that I didn't watch it. So it's gonna be
okay,
interesting.
go in with more of an open mind than that, because I love it. I love what they did.
I've gone in with such an
episode.
open mind for this entire show, so I think I'll be fine. Yeah, look, I just because at the time when I was on Tumblr, people were like, this isn't anything. And I was like, well, I can skip it because I'm already sick of this show. I was already broken by that point, and you'll see why. Because season 3 destroyed me at the time. Like I stopped watching. I didn't watch season 4 until it was all out, and I waited like 6 months and then watched it. Like I just lost interest completely. So I'd be curious to see how I stagger through that. But yeah, and then we've got our finale where we'll kind of cover the conspiracy stuff. But yeah, nearly there. So join us next time for season 3, episode 1, The Empty Hearse. We're probably going to take a bit of a break here, like we did last time, probably about a month, get in some Star Wars recordings in the interim. But if you want to support the show, you can find everything we do at zeroindent.com. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/zeroindent, where you could have listened to all these episodes when episode 1 came out on YouTube. You could have already listened to this and been like, man, I can't wait for season 3. You could have already done that if you're a Patreon subscriber. You also get access to over 100 hours of backlog content from our time making shows and different bits and pieces. If you like the kind of stuff we make, definitely check out Darth's YouTube channel, youtube.com/DarthD. I think that's not the URL, is it? I always get it wrong. It's something like that.
Yeah, I always just say go and search for Darth _D.
Yeah, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a show over there called That One Scene, where we take a single scene from Star Wars and we blow it up into its different components and analyze it. We've got a few really cool ideas on the horizon. Is there anything else you want to plug that's coming up? I guess we got the Kenobi analysis that should be probably that'll be up by the time you hear this for sure, because this episode won't come out for like a month, or 2 months even.
Yep, I've got it uploaded. I'm sitting in copyright claim land. So as soon as
I love that.
Yep.
I know that purgatory. Yeah, go check it out. Yeah, go to YouTube, Darth_D. Some really great stuff over there that we've done together, and some really awesome video essays. That's going to do it for us. We will be back with season 3, and we appreciate you listening or watching if you did. And if you managed to make it this far to the end and you're a loyal fan of ours, please make sure to tell a friend you think might like it. Or if you don't know any weirdos like us, maybe just leave a review or a rating on your platform of choice. If you don't want to have to text your brother and be like, here is a 3-hour show about each episode of Sherlock. That'll do it. We'll catch you guys next time.